Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jessie McFadden. At that time, Holly was 35 years old. She had 3 children from a previous relationship: 13 years old Tiffany, 17 years old Riley Allen, and 15 years old Michael Mayo. Each child had a different father. Holly was married to Joe, a prominent man, for 13 years. He was a wonderful father and stepfather to all the children. Even after their divorce, Joe continued to care for the children as if they were his own. He also wanted to adopt Riley and Michael, but he was never able to do so. Holly's new husband, Jesse McFadden, was not as good a father as Joe. At 39 years old, Jesse had a troubling past, including a criminal record. In 2003, he was charged with assaulting and raping a 15-year-old girl at knife point. He received a 20-year prison sentence, but got out 3 years early, in October 2020, after serving 17 years. Despite his history, Jesse was not placed on the sex offender list or the list of potentially dangerous criminals, which the authorities should have done. As a result, he kept his past from Holly and portrayed himself as a model stepfather. He attended her children's sports games and engaging with the family. His past remained hidden, and he was seen as a good person. He gives the impression of being a kind man and regularly attended the local church. Holly had no idea that she was getting involved with a very dangerous man. Jesse was about to go crazy and commit a heinous crime. In 1916, while serving time in prison, he had his mobile phone confiscated. On the phone, authorities found photos, videos, and text messages involving a 16-year-old girl named Caitlin. Her grandfather accidentally discovered this sensitive content and reported it to the police, thereby leading to an investigation in the prison. At that time, Jesse was considered a model prisoner, participating in almost all activities, which under state law, made him eligible for parole after serving 85% of his sentence. Despite meeting all the conditions for parole, Jesse lost this privilege due to the incident involving Caitlin. However, he eventually managed to resolve the situation and secure his parole. After being released from prison, Jesse followed the rule of reporting to the sheriff's office every 90 days. He did this so discreetly that Holly, the children, and neighbors were unaware of his situation. Holly, his wife, was unaware that he was forbidden from being in places with children, such as schools and sports matches. Meanwhile, Jesse was still under investigation and awaiting trial for explicit photos of Caitlin he had corresponded with while in prison. The trial was delayed until 2023 due to a series of unfortunate incidents. The prosecutor handling the case was suspended, and Jesse's lawyer passed away. On May 1, 2023, as the trial is about to begin, a terrible tragedy occurred the day before. On the morning of May 1, 2023, the parents of Ivy and Brittany became worried. Ivy and Brittany are Tiffany's friends. They were best friends and often spent time together, including sleeping together overnight. Everyone expected Ivy and Brittany to return home after a sleepover on April 29, but both did not return. Initially, their parents weren't concerned, as the girls frequently stayed overnight at each other's houses, and they assumed their daughters were spending another night with Tiffany. However, by the morning of May 1, they still cannot contact their children. Ivy and Brittany did not respond to their parents' calls or text messages and could not be located using the Life 360 app. Ivy and Brittany's parents also couldn't contact Tiffany and her family to confirm if their daughters were there. Because they were increasingly worried, they reported Ivy and Brittany missing to the police that same day. The police issued a missing persons alert for Ivy and Brittany and immediately began an investigation. Based on information from the girls' parents, they decided to check Jesse's house, where Ivy and Brittany were before they went missing. Upon arrival, the police officers knocked on the door but received no response. Looking through the windows, they saw something unusual inside, so they decided to enter the house. The scene inside the house horrified all the police. Inside, they found 7 mutilated bodies. Some people can only be identified through forensic examination. Among them was Jesse himself, his wife Holly, Riley, Michael, Tiffany, Brittany, and Ivy. All the victims were shot in the head with a 9mm pistol. Bodies were scattered throughout the house. The detectives determined that the murderer was a former criminal named Jesse McFadden. He attacked all the victims and then ended his life. The probable reason was that on May 1st, he was supposed to start a trial that had been postponed for a long time. It is presumed that he did it because he could no longer hide his dark criminal past. Perhaps his wife, Holly, discovered it, or he was worried that she would soon find out, so he killed his entire family to take his secret to the grave. After the officers reviewed Jesse's cell phone, they were able to clarify the motive. On April 30th, he contacted Caitlin, a girl he had been messaging from prison, using a fake account under the name Holly. He accused her of not withdrawing the charges against him, which he claimed was destroying his well-established life. He explained that after being released 2 years ago, he had rebuilt his life. He found a high-paying marketing job, started a family. He tried to convince Caitlin to recant her testimony to stop the trial. He argued that he had a good family and promising future. He sent several angry messages, asserting that he would never return to prison, regardless of the cost. The police concluded that he was enraged because he couldn't control his accuser, Caitlin. Detectives contacted Crystal Strong, a 36-year-old woman who was Jesse's first victim. In 2002, when she was only 15, Jesse attacked her with a knife. She was shocked to hear that he might be released from prison, believing he should remain behind bars forever. Crystal learns that the man who brutally sexually assaulted her has been pardoned. Despite the decision being made, but she still asked Oklahoma authorities to prevent his release because she believed he was dangerous in nature. At that time, she feared for her safety. After the attack, she detailed her ordeal to the police. Jesse, then 19 and dating her friend, kidnapped her from her home while she was alone. He took her to a secluded house in his pickup truck, where he chained her to a bed and brutally raped her. Despite her pleas for him to stop and release her, but he threatened her with a knife and continued his assault. Fortunately, he didn't kill her. Jesse instructed Crystal to wash off the evidence and clean her clothes. She agreed but instead used the opportunity to escape through the back door. She was crying and ran about half a kilometer to a neighbor's house to call the police. Following this, she underwent an extensive rehabilitation process, which helped her return to a normal life. She relocated to Kansas, where she hid for years due to the trauma of the brutal attack. Although doctors initially believed she couldn't have children, thankfully, their predictions were wrong. Crystal now has 4 children, which she views as a miracle. Crystal is confused that the police released Jesse, a dangerous criminal, too soon, even though she warned that he could not be reformed. It is also confusing why he was freed early despite being intoxicated. She believes the legal system has failed them, especially when he murdered 6 people in a brutal and painful manner. The victims' families also expressed their anger over Jesse's early release. It's hard to imagine how this cruel person managed to pretend to be a loving husband, a respectable neighbor, and a caring stepfather. None of his close friends suspect his horrific past. Although he regularly interacted with various people since December 2020, they were all shocked when the truth emerged. Ivy and Brittany's parents remember that their daughter and Tiffany were very close and often visited each other's homes. Ivy and Brittany's parents were familiar with Jesse and Holly and communicated with them regularly. They did not suspect Jesse, although he occasionally appeared strange and withdrawn. He had the odd habit of controlling Holly's and the children's movements, but they did not think much of it. Ivy and Brittany, who frequently stayed overnight at their homes, never mentioned anything negative about Jesse or his behavior. Ivy and Brittany never showed signs of bruises or injuries that would suggest abuse. During the investigation, it was discovered that Holly learned about Jesse's criminal past shortly before the tragedy. Holly's ex-husband found out about Jesse's criminal record by checking the database. He informed Holly, but Jesse acted quickly to cover up his past. Jesse hired an actress to convince Holly that the sexual assault allegations against him were a misunderstanding. The actress admitted that after the breakup, she accused Jesse of violence out of anger. However, she retracted the accusation after realizing she was wrong. Holly, unfortunately, believed this lie. Inside the house, police discovered even more terrifying clues. They found that all of Jesse's victims had been subjected to severe torture. The house resembled a torture chamber, with several beds equipped with chains and locks to restrain people. In the kitchen, police found a chain with a lock and different torture devices. The shocking clues are not just that. Bottles of lubricant and other sexual items were strewn around the house. Illegal substances and their paraphernalia were found across all rooms, including candies laced with similar content. Police also discovered other strange-looking objects and various blood-stained items, such as clothes, rags, and bed linen. Altogether, these clues indicate that the crime was horrific, revealing that Jesse's victims endured brutal torture before being killed. Holly and her children were likely tortured for several days. On April 29th, when Ivy and Brittany did visit Tiffany, they fell into a trap. They were tortured. Then, as they struggled to escape, but Jesse captured and killed them. During a house search, several laptops and mobile phones belonging to Jesse were discovered. These devices contained photos and videos documenting his torture activities. There was so much shocking evidence that the police couldn't collect everything in one day. Additional evidence of the brutal torture was gathered a few days later. A second search was conducted, uncovering more hidden evidence in the house and revealing new details. Receipts were found for purchases of locks, chains, and other items, shows that Jesse had a plan to control the victims. In addition, 5 other cell phones were found, along with Jesse's notebook, which contained the names of his recent victims. Jesse noted that he wanted to start a new life and become a better person, but no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't change the past. He also did not hesitate to impersonate Ivy. For example, Ivy's mother said the last message she received from her daughter was on Saturday, April 29th. They agreed that Ivy would come home on Sunday, April 30th. However, on the morning of April 30th, she received a text saying Ivy and her friends were going to another city and couldn't return that evening. Therefore, she didn't worry until the morning of May 1st. Although there were reasons for concern, she didn't notice them right away. The communication style of the message was unlike her daughter's. She thought it was because Ivy was in a hurry to get ready for the trip. Only now does she realize that her daughter was probably no longer alive at that point, and it was Jesse who was messaging her. The hardest thing for Holly's ex-husband, who is also the father of Riley, Michael, and Tiffany, is that he has been unable to provide any information to the police. Holly's ex-husband accused Jesse not only of the crimes he committed but also of his lies. He criminal tricked Holly by hiring an actress and hid his violent nature from friends, neighbors, and his new family for 2 years. The parents of Ivy and Brittany frequently visited their home, but no one suspected Jesse could be dangerous or doubted his identity. Detectives spoke with Jesse's former cellmate and were even more amazed at his deceptive skills. The cellmate, who spent almost every hour of the day with Jesse, only realized something was off after 6 months. Initially, Jesse seemed just like an eccentric and awkward individual. Nearly every conversation with him led to the topic of sex, revealing his obsession with it. At a medical facility, the cellmate saw Jesse stalking nurses. When he asked Jesse about his conviction, he got a vague response. Jesse mentioned a much lesser charge than what he had committed. The truth came out during an incident involving a contraband phone, which worsened the atmosphere in the cell. From then on, the cellmate was constantly tense, unable to sleep peacefully whenever Jesse was around. The tragic death of 6 people has caused strong public outrage. People were shocked by the incident. 6 innocent individuals were killed: Holly, her 3 children, and 2 teenage friends, Ivy and Brittany. The public accused state police of negligence, ignoring evidence, and failing to monitor dangerous criminals and manage parole for Jesse. Everyone was outraged, questioning why no one recognized how dangerous Jesse was. They believed that if his danger had been known, people would have avoided interacting with him, potentially preventing this tragedy. Even now, this case leaves more questions than answers. Holly's behavior is also unclear. The police are exploring all possibilities, including the idea that she not only knew about Jesse's past but also became an accomplice. Holly's mother firmly denies this theory, insisting that she was a loving, caring mother who could never harm her children. The police are still considering the possibility that Holly was an accomplice, but things spiraled out of control, leading Jesse to kill her and then end his life. However, these claims have yet to be confirmed or refuted. The investigation is ongoing. Jesse McFadden's family has been plagued by legal issues. His younger brother, Cody, has been involved in legal trouble since 2010. Cody was arrested for kidnapping a woman, locking her in a dog cage, assaulting her, and torturing her. Cody's case is still pending in court. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Lee. Annie Lee was born on July 3, 1985, in San Jose, California, to Vivian Van Lee and Hogan Lee, Vietnamese immigrants. As an only child, Annie demonstrated exceptional intelligence and talent from an early age, consistently excelling in her studies and being considered the top student in her school. Annie's favorite subjects were chemistry and biology. Her teachers believed she had a bright future in science, with some even predicting she might one day win a Nobel Prize. Throughout her school years, Annie actively participated in scientific conferences, where her work garnered various awards and recognition. As a high school student, she secured a $65,000 scholarship to study at any U.S. university. Annie chose the University of Rochester in New York, where she studied cellular development biology and medical anthropology. She later enrolled in Yale University's graduate school, working in a scientific laboratory and pursuing a doctoral degree in chemistry and biology. Annie's dissertation focused on the study of diseases caused by metabolic disorders. During her time working in the laboratory, she gained much research knowledge, which contributed to the treatment of diabetes and certain types of cancer. Annie, a student at the University of Rochester in New York, while pursuing her studies, met Jonathan Widowski, a fellow student and promising scientist. The two quickly dating, and their parents were pleased with their relationship. After graduating, Annie moved to New Haven, Connecticut, to attend Yale, while Jonathan chose to pursue his studies at Columbia University in New York. Despite the distance, the couple maintained their romance, visiting each other every weekend and making plans for their future. In the summer of 2009, Jonathan proposed to Annie with a beautiful diamond ring, and she happily accepted. They set their wedding date for Sunday, September 13, 2009. Initially, they only shared the news with their parents and close friends, keeping their colleagues in the dark. It wasn't until a week before the wedding, on September 6th, that Annie sent out emails to friends and colleagues, announcing their upcoming marriage and a wedding invitation. The day after, The news spread rapidly throughout the department and the lab where Annie worked, becoming the most discussed topic. Annie and her fiancé had planned a wedding ceremony on Long Island, followed by a honeymoon at a luxurious resort in Greece. A few months before she went missing, Annie had written an article for the university publication, where she cautioned students about potential dangers and provided safety tips for when they were off campus. However, despite being aware of the risks, Annie herself fell victim to an unexpected tragedy at her workplace. On Tuesday, September 8, Annie left her university dormitory, where she shared a room with 3 friends, and headed to the University Medical Center laboratory, where she worked. The laboratory building, located on Amistad Street, has restricted access and requires a pass and special key card for entry and movement within the premises. A CCTV camera at the entrance captured Annie entering the building around 10 o'clock that morning. She went to her office, changed her clothes, stored her personal belongings, put on a medical coat, locked the door, and proceeded to the biolab. However, Annie never returned to her office that day and seemed to vanish in the corridors. Unfortunately, no one ever saw her alive again. On the evening Annie went missing, her dormitory neighbors were the first to discover the incident. They had grown accustomed to Annie's punctual nature, as she usually returned home at the same time every day. However, as midnight approached and she failed to return, her friends began to worry. Their concerns deepened when they were unable to reach Annie on her phone. Deciding to take action, they reported her disappearance to the police. Upon investigation, it was discovered that Annie's parents and fiancé had also been unable to contact her that night. Initially, they had assumed she was working late due to her heavy workload and would call them back when she was available. When the police arrived, they weren't too worried. They had heard what had happened and assumed that Annie was nervous before the wedding and needed time to calm down. However, their opinion quickly changed after examining Annie's office and reviewing the CCTV footage. They also tracked her movements within the building using her key card. The evidence revealed that Annie had entered the building in the morning but never exited. Her personal belongings, including her clothes, bag, wallet, and cell phone, were still in her office. Despite an extensive search, no sign of Annie was found, leaving behind only the unsettling feeling that she had vanished into thin. The disappearance of Annie Lee, a graduate student, led to an extensive investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those who knew Annie personally described her as intelligent, kind, cheerful, and energetic, with no known enemies. Her family and fiancé anxiously waited for news, hope she will return safely. However, detectives were less optimistic, concluding that it was likely she was no longer alive. The laboratory building, crime scene, was placed under guard, and the list of suspects was narrowed down to staff and students with authorized access. The university atmosphere was tense, because everyone realized that the killer might be somewhere nearby. Annie's fiancé, Jonathan, who had flown in from another state, was questioned but had a solid alibi. Despite this, he was visibly shaken and on the verge of a nervous breakdown, deeply concerned about Annie's disappearance. Among the suspects, one is Annie's teacher. On the day she disappeared, he canceled his lectures for unknown reasons and had no alibi. Although his was initially questioned, after the police still believed the perpetrator was likely someone from Yale University's laboratory, either a student, faculty member, or staff. A disturbing detect was found on September 12, providing the first evidence that Annie was no longer alive. A medical coat stained with blood was discovered hidden behind a false ceiling in an auxiliary room of a building. The coat did not belong to Annie, but further examination revealed that the blood on it was indeed hers. On September 13, the body Annie was found in a narrow pipeline on the technical floor of the laboratory. The day she was supposed to get married and leave for her honeymoon in Greece. Her petite stature and fragile build made it easier for her killer to stuff her body into the small space. A service dog's keen sense of smell helped the police locate Annie's body. The location where her body was hidden suggested that the killer was familiar with the laboratory's layout. It was a spot that was hard to access, making it a clever yet sinister choice for concealing the crime. Annie's body showed severe signs of trauma. Most of her ribs were broken, her limbs were damaged, and several teeth were knocked out. However, according to the pathologists, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia, which meant that Annie was severely beaten and then strangled. A further examination revealed that Annie's clothes had traces of seminal fluid. But it was concluded that she had not been raped. A few days before Annie's body was discovered, police attention was initially drawn to Raymond J. Clark III, a young laboratory technician. Raymond claimed to have seen Annie leave the building without her belongings, implying she intended to return. However, his testimony aroused suspicion from the police. Following the discovery of Annie's body, Raymond became the primary suspect. They collected DNA samples from Raymond and asked him not to leave the country until the investigation was completed. On September 17th, Raymond was arrested. Forensic examination results showed that his semen was found on Annie's clothes. And his robe, stained with Annie's blood, was discovered hidden in the suspended ceiling. Additionally, Raymond had suspicious bruises on his body, suggesting that Annie had fiercely defended herself before her death. Despite the incriminating evidence, Raymond denied any involvement in the crime. Further investigation showed that Raymond was a very hot-tempered person, easily angered and often had workplace conflicts. He frequently engaged in verbal altercations with colleagues and had a reputation for being cruel, having physically abused women he had relationships with in the past. Raymond did not excel academically, but he stood out as a promising athlete in school. He is known for his handsome looks and has a strong appeal to women. However, he was unable to get into university due to poor grades. Fortunately, with the help of some relatives, Raymond secured a job at a laboratory, starting as a janitor and eventually working his way up to become a technician. During this time, Raymond was in a relationship with a woman named Jessica Del Rocco. However, their relationship was tumultuous, and Jessica later testified against Raymond in court. She described him as controlling, stating that he would constantly monitor her activities, read her messages, and dictate what she could do and couldn't do. He would also become violent when they disagreed. And Jessica claimed that he would physically abuse her. After one particularly brutal incident, Jessica fled from Raymond. She temporarily relocated to another state to escape his abuse. Then Raymond had been in a relationship with Jennifer Radko, a Yale University student, for the past year. Jennifer ignored rumors about his alleged infidelity with students and lab employees. She accepted his marriage proposal, and they proceeding with wedding preparations. The motive behind the murder remains unclear, even after he fully admitted his guilt. He never revealed his motive, even after admitting to the crime. Initially, it was thought that the murder was related to a workplace conflict. Annie was conducting experiments on laboratory mice to study the effectiveness of enzymes in treating cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. Raymond, who considered the laboratory his domain, was in charge of the mice. Two theories emerged about the incident leading to the murder. The first theory suggests that Raymond might have had a conflict with Annie. On the day of the murder, Annie stayed late in the laboratory and entered the area where experimental animals were kept. Raymond, who had cleaned the area, go in there too. The confrontation could have intensified into a physical altercation, which in turn could have led to Annie being strangled by Raymond a fit of rage. A second theory proposes that Raymond had feelings for Annie, but she rejected his advances. Raymond, unaccustomed to rejection, was hurt by her refusal. When he learned about her upcoming wedding on September 7th, Raymond was completely overcome by intense feelings of jealousy. The next day, when he was alone with Annie in the laboratory, He attacked her, beating and attempting to rape her, then ultimately strangling her. This theory explains the appearance of seminal fluid on Annie's clothes. The case gained widespread media attention from the start. The victim was a promising young scientist, and the crime was committed on campus. Raymond first appeared in court in Connecticut on October 6, 2009, where he denied any involvement in the murder and the charges against him. The hearing was postponed multiple times to allow for the collection of all evidence and materials. It was discovered that Raymond had spent at least an hour with Annie in the laboratory, during which the murder took place. In an attempt to mislead investigators, Raymond used his key card over 50 times at various locations, eventually making his way to the technical floor. There, he spent around 15 minutes hiding the body in the wall. Raymond then activated the fire alarm, which forced the staff to evacuate the building, providing him with an opportunity to blend in and avoid suspicion. A crucial piece of evidence was discovered in the pocket of a robe found hidden under a false ceiling, a green ballpoint pen. Further examination revealed that Raymond had used this pen to sign his name in various work logs on the same day. Additionally, witnesses reported seeing Raymond scrubbing specific areas of the lab floor repeatedly over the next few days. Despite the floor appearing clean, he also disposed of the cleaning equipment and a pack of tissues with small brown stains, resembling blood splatters, in a trash can. Forensic analysis later confirmed that the tissues contained Annie's blood, indicating that Raymond had made a thorough attempt to eliminate any evidence. In February 2011, Clark agreed to a plea deal in exchange for a reduced sentence. At the court hearing on March 17, 2011, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted rape and apologized to Tanny's parents and fiancé. However, Raymond never revealed the details of the incident leading up to the murder or his motivation for the crime. As a result, he was sentenced to 44 years in prison. Raymond is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in New Haven County, Connecticut, and will not be eligible for release until September 2053. The parents and fiancé of Annie have expressed that they find the given sentence to be fair. At the sentencing, Annie's mother delivered a heartfelt speech. With tears in her eyes, she expressed that she would never get the opportunity to hold her daughter again, witness her marriage, hear her laughter, or enjoy the presence of her grandchildren. She said goodbye to her child, whom she cherished as the greatest gift from God. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, chess club, science club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise is protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22-year-old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23-year-old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Turpins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continued to live a lavish lifestyle and continued to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Turpins, but they didn't know the Turpins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Turpins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Turpins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Turpins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland. This is evident from that they have come here many times. And they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, the girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a family with two older brothers. Although Debbie's parents divorced when she was young, but her father always gave her love and care. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family resided in a small apartment building in a quiet neighborhood nearby a military base. Debbie was a happy and outgoing child who enjoyed socializing with friends, playing basketball, and collecting dolls, which she would often spend hours playing with. On January 13, 1972, 9-year-old Debbie had dinner with her family. Afterward, her mother asked her to go to the nearby laundromat, a task she had done many times before. Debbie's job was to supervise the laundry while it washed. A family member would accompany her to the laundromat to help carry the clothes, but they would return home, leaving Debbie to wait for the wash cycle to finish. The laundromat was just across the street from their home, so her mother is not too worried. It was a common practice at the time for children to help with household chores, like laundry. In fact, Debbie had even made friends with other girls she met at the laundromat. Her mother wants to let Debbie's brother go with her that day, but he wasn't feeling well and preferred to stay home and watch his favorite TV show. Her mom then asked her husband to take the laundry instead, and Debbie accompanied him, bringing a box of detergent along the way. When they arrived, her stepdad unloaded the laundry into 2 washing machines and then left. Debbie stayed behind to wait for the wash cycle to finish. Once it was done, she planned to walk home and ask someone to come back and pick up the clean clothes, as she wasn't strong enough to carry them all by herself. After a while, Debbie's mom realized she hadn't returned home, despite the fact that the laundry had been finished. As the sun started to set, she and her husband decided to look for Debbie. They walked to the laundromat but didn't find her there. A staff member told them that Debbie had left a while ago, and she hadn't returned yet. Getting concerned, Debbie's mom and her husband, Roy, started searching the surrounding streets for her. During their search, they noticed something unusual. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot, detergent had been spilled next to one of the cars. This caught her attention because Debbie had been carrying a box of detergent. Her mom immediately suspected that the spilled detergent might be connected to Debbie's disappearance. They continued to search the parking lot and the surrounding area for Debbie, but no other signs of her were found. Neighbors who were familiar with Debbie's family joined the search, but despite their efforts, no progress was made. Debbie's mother decided to call the police. Officers checked the area in the parking lot where the detergent had been spilled. The police noticed a new lead, near a parked car close to the detergent. Multiple clear fingerprints were visible on the car door, just inches away from the spilled detergent. What caught their attention was that the fingerprints looked fresh, and they were located very low to the door handle, which raised suspicions. The police suspected that an unknown person may have taken Debbie and touched the car in the process, leaving the fingerprints behind. The police collected the fingerprints and handed them over to forensic experts for analysis. At the same time, the police began searching for the car's owner to determine whether the fingerprints belonged to them or an unknown person. The police began searching the streets for additional clues or witnesses. The laundromat employee reported that she had not noticed anything unusual. According to her, Debbie had been waiting for her laundry to finish and then left the building with a box of detergent, likely heading home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. However, it was not long before the police found their first key witness, whose statement would change the direction of the investigation. Sandra, a 12 years old, was walking to the laundromat with her friend to do some laundry. As they approached the laundromat, they witnessed a disturbing scene. A man grabbed a girl from the street and pulled her into his parked car near the laundromat. The girl struggled to free herself and screamed, but the man quickly got into the driver's seat and sped away. In the process, he almost hit Sandra and her friend. One of them shouted after the car as it drove off, but it was too late. At the time, Sandra didn't think much of the incident, assuming the man was the girl's father or a relative picking her up. She didn't report the incident to the police or tell any adults about what she had seen. A crucial witness came forward after learning about Debbie's abduction, providing investigators with vital information. The witness reported that the perpetrator's vehicle was a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a 1957 model. She described the driver as a young white male with thick, dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Additionally, another girl who lived in the same building as Debbie shared her own observations from that evening. As she stood outside her apartment, a dark pickup truck drove by, initially her think it was her uncle behind the wheel. However, when the driver stopped in front of her and made eye contact, she realized it was not her uncle. A woman gave investigators a detailed description of a suspect, a white man in his 30s with medium-length dark hair. After gathering more information, they discovered another important witness who lived near the victim's house. The witness nearly collided with a dark pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, which was driving erratically. The driver, around 30 years old with dark hair, was recklessly maneuvering the vehicle. What caught the witness's attention was a girl inside the truck, desperately trying to escape while being restrained by the driver's one hand. The police distributed information about the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and had police artists create a sketch based on the descriptions provided by the three witnesses. The search was divided into two main directions, with some officers searching for similar vehicles and verifying the owners, while others focused on locating Debbie. Each day, the search operation grew, with more volunteers and police officers from neighboring towns joining in. Approximately 4,000 people participated in the large-scale search operation, a record-setting number for both the city and the state. Meanwhile, detectives investigated Debbie's acquaintances, including her male neighbors, stepfather, and biological father. However, after the investigation, all of them were ruled out as suspects. Debbie's father, who lived in the same city, was informed of his daughter's disappearance and immediately joined the search. Detectives searched for Debbie by checking the backgrounds of previously convicted criminals living nearby, but they didn't find any suspects. Despite 2 weeks of searching, no leads were found. On January 29th, students joined the search and were tasked with searching a wooded area close to Debbie's home. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students found footprints leading off the trail and into the forest, indicating that something had been dragged. Following the tracks 150 feet into the woods, the students stumbled upon a human body. They immediately contacted the officers, and they quickly confirmed that the body was Debbie Randall. She was wearing a lavender dress and a dark blue zip-up jacket with a hood, matching the description provided by her mother on the day she went missing. However, her new lavender shoes, a Christmas gift she had received just weeks earlier and was particularly fond of, were missing. She still had her socks on, but her shoes were nowhere to be found. Debbie's body was examined by medical experts, who concluded that she died from strangulation and had also been assaulted sex. A single dark hair was found on her body, which likely belonged to the killer. However, since DNA analysis was not available at that time, this evidence could not be further analyzed. The experts used a microscope to examine the hair and made a guess, based on their knowledge at the time, that it belonged to a man between 18 and 30 years old. Debbie's clothing was contaminated with dirt, which, in the absence of other leads, detectives decided to scrutinize more closely. They consulted a geologist who worked with the forensic team to analyze the dirt. The results showed that some of the dirt was a specific type of clay, which was from a location less than 10 miles from the city. Further examination confirmed that this clay was the unique Northern Georgia clay. Additionally, distinct dirt stains from another type of clay were discovered, originating from a local mining site just 2 miles from the location of the body. Detectives developed a theory about the incident surrounding Debbie's death. They believed that the perpetrator did not kill she immediately. Instead, they think the perpetrator first drove she to a remote area outside of town where they sexually assaulted her. The perpetrator then drove to another location where they killed Debbie. After her death, the perpetrator transported his body to a forest and leaving it there. This theory is supported by evidences, including clay samples and forensic analysis, which suggest that Debbie was already dead when her body was brought to the forest. The absence of signs of a struggle in the forest area also lends credibility to this theory. The locations of the clay mining sites were remote and difficult to access, suggesting that the killer might have familiarized themselves with the area through work. A mining company supervisor confirmed that the area was hard to navigate even for experienced workers, making the possibility that a stranger could take Debbie there impossible. Police investigated employees from both companies, searching for a man matching the description suspects or someone with a similar car, but this investigation did not produce any leads. They also found fingerprints on the car near the abduction site, which they compared to those of all suspects, but unfortunately, this did not yield any results. The news of Debbie's brutal murder sent shockwaves throughout the city, drawing thousands to her funeral to pay their respects. Despite the local police department's relentless pursuit of justice, the case hit numerous roadblocks, leaving investigators with no new leads for years. The case went cold, but detectives continued to work tirelessly, scrutinizing dozens of suspects yet struggling to establish their involvement. For lead detective Morris Nix, who was just 19 when the case began and has been involved from the start, solving Debbie's murder has become his primary motivation. He pursued multiple leads and suspects over the years, carefully evaluating the evidence and eventually narrowing down the list to 4 men he considered the most likely suspects. The FBI created a DNA database, and experts were able to obtain the perpetrator's genetic profile from a hair found on Debbie's body. The DNA was added to the database, but no matches were found. This suggests that the killer had either never committed a serious crime before or their DNA had not been collected by authorities yet. 43 years after the murder, in 2015, detectives reopened the case and decided to reanalyze Debbie's clothing using advanced technology, as the items had been stored in the evidence warehouse all that time. Experts discovered biological material from a man on the evidence. Debbie's mother spent decades hoping to see her daughter's killer caught and brought to justice. In a 2018 interview, she revealed the pain of living in an apartment where there were many memories of her daughter. Although she eventually moved to a new city, the lack of progress in the case weighed heavily on her for years. When she gets old, her one wish was to see the case resolved before she passed away. Sadly, she passed away from cancer at 78, just weeks after the interview, and her wish was left unfulfilled. She was laid to rest beside her daughter. In 2019, the local police department received extra funding, allowing them to conduct a more detailed analysis of Debbie's clothes. The experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was also interviewed, sharing that he thought about Debbie every day over the decades. He held on to a box of her old photos, hoping to reunite with her in heaven. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, just after the interview. In 2022, detectives focused on the case, following their one lead, DNA. They contacted a Florida company that specialized in genetic genealogy, an innovative DNA analysis method. The police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years. Using these samples, experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and searched for his relatives in genetic databases. To identify the killer, investigators exhaustively examined thousands of using genetic genealogy, then they focused on one family in Marietta. In 2023, the family members willingly provided DNA samples, which helped investigators establish a familial connection to the killer. The results confirmed that the killer was a close relative of this family. After conducting a more thorough investigation, experts were able to identify one person, William Rose, could be the owner of the DNA sample. However, Rose had died in 1974, 2 years after the murder. Undeterred, detectives sought to finally resolve the case and obtained a warrant to exhume William's remains, enabling experts to collect a direct DNA sample. After 51 years, police finally discovered the identity of Debbie's killer. William Rose, who was 24 years old at the time, matched the DNA evidence and was revealed to be the perpetrator. Notably, William had never been a suspect in the investigation. Further research showed that his relatives lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he often visited them. Investigators believe this frequent contact likely gave him multiple opportunities to see Debbie. On the evening of the murder, it's possible that William was heading to visit his relatives, and he encountered Debbie leaving the laundromat. According to witness testimonies, William pulled his vehicle into the parking lot between Debbie's house and the laundromat. He left the engine running, exited his vehicle, grabbed Debbie, and drove north. The direction of his escape led police to suspect that he may have immediately driven to a nearby clay quarry. Notably, William had no other serious criminal offenses on record. It is unclear whether he committed other crimes that went undetected or if Debbie's murder was an isolated incident. By the time the case was solved, the only living close relative of Debbie was her older brother, Melvin. He attended a press conference where the identification of the culprit was announced and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving his younger sister's case after more than 50 years. Melvin also shared that he wished his mother had lived to see this moment, but he took comfort in believing that she was now reunited with Debbie in heaven. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry was born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, a small town in the United States. As the youngest of 10 children, her parents faced great challenges in providing for their large family. In difficult circumstances, Crystal and her siblings grew up quite independently, with her parents being too busy to look after all the children. Fortunately, Crystal's older sister, who was only 12 years old when Crystal was born, took on the role of mother and looked after her younger brothers and sisters. Growing up in such a difficult environment, they all wanted to start their own lives as soon as possible, so her siblings lived in different cities and states. Crystal also dreamed of starting a family. While in high school, she met Tom and they eventually got married. Initially, they moved to California, but Crystal soon realized that city life was not for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine and settled in Bridgeton, a small town about an hour away from Crystal's hometown. The quaint town is famous for being the setting of Stephen King's novel, The Mist. Crystal worked at a local shoe store, while Tom held various part-time jobs. Later, Crystal found out she was pregnant and they welcomed their daughter, Sarah. Although Tom initially wanted to be a father, his relationship with Crystal became complicated after their daughter was born. He began spending more and more time at a local bar, wasting almost all of their money on alcohol. At one point, he even took all of Crystal's savings to buy groceries, leaving them without food. The financial burden of Tom's drinking problem became too much for their relationship, and Crystal eventually decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom still visited his daughter occasionally, but he was not actively involved in her life. The situation became worse when Tom started dating someone new and his girlfriend began harassing Crystal, constantly calling and threatening her, visiting her house and causing chaos in public, all because she could not accept Crystal's previous marriage to Tom. Crystal was hesitant about Sarah visiting her father because she was worried that his new girlfriend could endanger Sarah's safety. After her parents' divorce, Crystal moved in with her mother. She spent years saving money, and finally, she was able to buy her own house. The house was located in the suburb of Bridgeton, near a peaceful lake and a forest. Crystal and Sarah were delighted to finally have a place they could call their own. Crystal grew up in a large family, so when she had her own daughter, she gave her as much time, attention, and love as she could. After a long day at work, Crystal and her daughter, Sarah, would often rent a movie or just talk for hours. One evening, on May 10, 1994, when Crystal was 30 and Sarah was 12, they watched the solar eclipse together. The next day went as usual. Crystal went to work and Sarah went to school. That evening, they had dinner and Crystal put Sarah to bed. A few hours later, Sarah woke to the sound of her mother screaming. At first, she thought Crystal was on the phone, arguing with someone. However, she quickly realized the situation was much more serious. Crystal's screams were loud and frantic, making Sarah think someone was attacking her mother. With the bedroom door ajar, Sarah mustered up the courage to approach, despite her mounting fear. She moved closer to the door, and as she listened, she realized the scream was coming from the kitchen. However, from where she stood, Sarah couldn't see what was happening. Sarah was terrified, not daring to move or make a sound, afraid of revealing her location. Then she heard footsteps, and her heart sank as she assumed that her mother's attacker was now coming for her. In a desperate attempt to escape, she hid behind the bed and waited anxiously for the door to open. However, instead of the door, she heard the sound of a kitchen drawer sliding open, followed by the sound of someone rummaging through utensils. Her mother's continuous screams and desperate pleas for forgiveness filled the house, and in the next few seconds, Sarah heard what sounded like someone had started stabbing her mother with a knife. With each brutal stab, her mother's cries grew fainter and fainter until they strangely stopped. Gathering her courage, Sarah finally left the room and went to the kitchen. What she saw was a horrifying sight. The only light came from the moon shining through the window, as the kitchen lights were off. The clock on the wall read 1 a.m. When she entered the kitchen, she saw her mother lying on the floor in a large pool of blood that covered the entire floor. Despite her shock, Sarah knew she had to call for help immediately. Next to her mother's hand was a phone. Sarah quickly picked up the phone and dialed 911, but she only received complete silence on the other end of the line. She then ran to Crystal's room to try the second phone. But unfortunately, it didn't work either. Despite trying several times and getting the same result, Sarah realized that she had only one option left: to seek help from the neighbors. Braving the cold of the May night in only her pajamas and bare feet, Sarah ran out of the house and into the street. Her main concern was to find someone to help her injured mother. She started running to the nearest house, about half a mile away, towards the center of the city. However, when she knocked repeatedly, no one answered. Undeterred, Sarah continued to run to other nearby houses, knocking on each door, but still no one answered. Finally, after several attempts at many houses, Sarah arrived at a local Italian restaurant, whose owner lived in the adjacent building. She knocked desperately and finally got an answer. The owner, shocked by Sarah's panicked state, let her in and listened as she explained the urgency of the situation. Her mother had been attacked and she desperately needed help. Sarah then called 911 herself and reported what had happened. The police immediately arrived at their home. When they examined the front door glass, they discovered a fingerprint, which they quickly identified as Sarah's. A thorough search of the crime scene found no other fingerprints. However, the kitchen floor revealed several bloody shoe prints. Police took photographs to determine the size and style of the shoes, suspecting they belonged to the killer. The shoe prints led to Sarah's bedroom but mysteriously stopped at the entrance, as if the killer had returned without entering the room. Police noticed two unusual details at the crime scene. It was clear that the killer had tried to wipe some of the blood off the floor. However, it was clear that the killer could not remove all of the blood, as there was blood everywhere. However, there were also other drops that fell to the floor at right angles, and judging by the splatters from a greater height, the police speculated that the killer had injured himself during the murder, and that the blood was theirs. This theory was reinforced by the discovery of a trail of blood leading to a roll of tissue paper, but there were no remaining rolls nearby. It is possible that the killer used the tissue paper to stop the bleeding after being injured during the murder, and then immediately left the crime scene. Medical experts discovered more than 50 stab wounds on Crystal's body, indicating that this was a violent and intentional attack. The murder weapon, later determined to be a kitchen knife, was not found at the scene, suggesting that the killer had taken it with them when they left. During this process, a piece of the knife broke off and was embedded in Crystal's body, further highlighting the force used. Additional testing revealed that Crystal had been sexually assaulted, allowing experts to collect DNA and blood samples from the perpetrator. Despite this crucial evidence, the investigation was plagued by unexpected delays. Due to a lack of funding, the local lab was overwhelmed, so it would take at least 6 months to get the results. This forced the police to begin their investigation without any concrete evidence. Initially, the police ruled out a robbery, as nothing appeared to have been missing from the house. They also noted that there were no signs of forced entry, leading them to conclude that the perpetrator was likely someone Crystal knew, as she likely opened the door for them. Since she was wearing pajamas at the time of the incident, it is unlikely that she was waiting for guests, leading police to speculate about a potential relationship between Crystal and her attacker. The police have two main theories about the case. Crystal knew the killer and let them in willingly, or the killer was a stranger who knocked on the door and tricked Crystal into opening the door. To gather more information, the police decide to start by questioning the only witness, Sarah. At the hospital, where Sarah is being checked, the police ask her why she ran to a neighbor's house for help instead of calling 911 from her own home. Sarah explains that she couldn't use her phone because it wasn't working, but the investigation finds this explanation suspicious, as both Sarah's and Crystal's phones were working properly when checked by the police at the crime scene. Police believe Sarah may have become confused due to the stress of the situation. Initially, they considered the possibility that the first phone was inoperable, as the first caller had turned off her phone and needed to reset it to make another call. As for the second phone, they did not rule out the possibility that Sarah may have dialed the wrong number in her haste or that the phone line may have been temporarily disconnected due to the rain. As the investigation continued, the police asked Sarah if she had seen the killer. Sarah replied that she had been in her bedroom during the incident. However, the police were a little skeptical of her story and asked how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife. Sarah's explanation was that it was obvious. But the police continued to press her. They felt that she might be withholding some information and that she had actually seen the killer. In the 3 days after the murder, the police interviewed Sarah 18 times. They hoped her story would change, but she stuck to her original account of events. Then the police found their first important clue. A local shoe store had a pair of boots with soles that matched the bloody footprints found at the scene. They also discovered that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, the girlfriend of her ex-husband Tom. Although the killer was clearly a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa because she had repeatedly threatened to kill Crystal. Teresa may have had someone help her commit the crime, but the police did not find any evidence to support this idea. During their investigation, they discovered that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years before Dennis started working at the shoe store where Crystal worked. They began dating soon after and eventually became engaged, although they never married. The police found that their relationship was strained, with frequent arguments between the couple and Dennis sometimes engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking things and punching walls. However, the police did not find any evidence that he had ever harmed Crystal. The day after the murder, the police came to Dennis's house. When he opened the door, they asked him if he had left the night before or if he had seen Crystal. Dennis immediately responded by asking if Crystal was dead, and he passed out shortly after. After regaining consciousness, Dennis began answering the police's questions. He explained that he had originally planned to visit Crystal that evening, but he had been late for work because he had helped a friend fix his car. When he finally returned home, he called Crystal, but she told him it was too late to visit. This led to an argument and Dennis stayed home. Although the police could not be 100% sure that he was telling the truth, they were able to verify that he had helped his friend fix his car that evening. Dennis also voluntarily took a lie detector test, which the police found no signs of lying. Although the police noticed that he had the same shoe size as the killer, they did not find any matching shoes in Dennis's home. He agreed to provide a DNA sample, but he asked the police to do him a favor, saying that if they decided to arrest him, they should enter his workplace through the back door to avoid disturbing others. He explained that his boss had always treated him well and he did not want to disrupt work. During the investigation, the police contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town. This friend shared a disturbing conversation she had had with Crystal just a few weeks earlier. In the story, Crystal expressed fear for Dennis. Their arguments escalated and Dennis became increasingly aggressive. Crystal considered ending the relationship but hesitated for fear of Dennis's reaction. The police then went to Crystal's workplace to further question her coworkers, but were unable to gather any useful information. As soon as the police left Crystal's workplace, Dennis entered and began asking what the coworkers had told the police. Despite the police's efforts, no evidence was found to implicate Dennis, and had to wait months for the DNA results, so they continued to search for other potential leads. This led them to a local man named Donnie, who had gotten drunk at a party and started bragging about killing Crystal. During the investigation, police brought Donnie in for questioning. However, the man claimed that he had no memory of attending a party and denied any involvement in the murder. Police later discovered that Donnie was an alcoholic and a notorious liar. In another development, a witness reported seeing a black pickup truck with New Hampshire plates near Crystal's neighborhood, but this lead ultimately went unanswered. Another witness came forward describing an incident in which she drove past Crystal's house on the night of the murder. She recalled hearing sirens, assuming they were related to her boyfriend, who lived down the street and was a frequent troublemaker. At the same time, she saw a car with headlights following her at high speed. Thinking that the driver was chasing her, she turned onto another street. However, the car passed her. Police have not been able to confirm whether the car was related to Crystal's murder. The investigation is still ongoing, and they have had difficulty finding any concrete evidence. In an effort to get the case back on track, Crystal's family has offered a $10,000 reward for any information and has posted flyers around town to attract potential witnesses. However, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, Teresa, has been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers. Crystal's ex-husband, Tom, was investigated thoroughly, but police eventually ruled him out as a suspect. He was an alcoholic and had become worse over the years, leaving him almost drunk. In this state, it seemed impossible for him to commit such a crime. And he had no apparent motive. The police investigated 2 other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but found no connection between them and the crime. All the men, including Tom, provided DNA samples. The police waited for the test results, which took 9 months. When they did, they showed that the blood and semen samples did not match any of the suspects, including Dennis. With no new leads, the police requested a DNA sample from Dennis again for further testing, but the results remained the same. With no progress, they decided to re-interview their only witness, Sarah. They still believed that she was lying to them, or that her mind had blocked out the horrific memories of her mother's murder and that she had actually seen the killer. To investigate further, they traveled to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt, and took a polygraph test. The results showed no deception on Sarah's part. However, the police continued to interrogate her over and over again, asking the same questions. But she repeatedly insisted that she had not seen the killer. Ultimately, the case remained unsolved for years, with police continuing to interview witnesses and potential suspects, but without any significant breakthroughs. In the late 1990s, the FBI DNA database became available, allowing police to upload a DNA sample of Crystal's killer. However, no match was found. A new police officer took over the case in 1999, determined to review all the available evidence and collect more DNA samples from men in the town and surrounding areas. Advances in laboratory technology allowed for faster testing, and hundreds of samples were collected. Unfortunately, none of these samples matched the killer's DNA. The police also asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to explore the possibility of recovering repressed memories of the crime. Sarah agreed, but the psychologist concluded that her claim of not seeing the perpetrator was true and that she had not actually repressed any memories. Years passed. And despite the police's continued efforts, the case remained unsolved due to a lack of new leads. The case took a surprising turn in 2006 when police received news of a DNA match. A DNA sample entered into an FBI database matched blood and semen found at Crystal's crime scene. The DNA belonged to Michael Hutchinson, a man who had never been investigated or suspected in the case. Further investigation revealed that in 2003, Michael had been arrested and convicted of assault with a weapon, resulting in a 6-month prison sentence followed by 3 years of probation, during which time his DNA was collected. A DNA sample from Michael was initially collected but not uploaded to the FBI database and remained on file at the lab. Years later, Michael was arrested for driving drunk with a child in the car. After being released on bail, he failed to appear in court and was subsequently sent to jail. On the day of his wedding, Michael was arrested and taken into custody. A new DNA sample was taken from him, and this time, it was uploaded to the database immediately. Soon after, the police on Crystal's case received a match. They informed Sarah of the development but asked her to keep it a secret until formal charges were filed. The police also asked Sarah if she knew the suspect, and she said no. With Michael in custody, the police began to slowly build their case to ensure that the suspect had no chance of escaping punishment. They discovered that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's home. Michael was 19 and lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. Since Michael frequently visited his mother's house, just a short distance from Crystal's home, the police suspected that Michael may have seen Crystal on several occasions. The police visited Michael in prison and asked him about the murder, but Michael denied any involvement and claimed that he did not know Crystal. However, the police were skeptical of Michael's story, as his DNA was found on Crystal's body and his blood was found at the crime scene. While in custody, the police made an interesting observation about Michael. He had a large scar on the palm of his hand, which appeared to match the wound that Crystal's killer may have suffered during the murder. Although the scar alone was not enough to prove Michael guilty in court, the presence of his DNA firmly linked him to the crime. He was later charged with murder. The prosecution presented evidence that Michael, a user of illegal drugs, had frequently passed by Crystal's house, and that on the fateful night he decided to attack her. But he refused to plead guilty, so it is impossible to know how it all happened. But with the evidence available, the outcome was clear: Michael attacked and killed Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was also sought for the killer not leaving any fingerprints at the crime scene, as Michael worked as a bricklayer. Over time, people who do this work often have worn and torn patterns on their palms, making it impossible for them to leave fingerprints on the surface. In his testimony, Michael stated that he met Crystal at a bar and they went back to her place, where they had consensual sex. A man in a black motorcycle jacket broke into the house, attacked Michael, and killed Crystal. Michael regained consciousness and tried to fight off the attacker, but he was injured in the hand and the attacker escaped. However, Michael then left the crime scene without a valid reason, which raised doubts about his story. There were several inconsistencies, including the fact that the only shoe prints at the scene were Michael's, suggesting that if his testimony was true, the intruder would have had to remove his shoes before entering, which is highly unlikely. Additionally, there were no other signs of a break-in or struggle at the scene. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with a guilty verdict for Michael. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Michael remains incarcerated to this day. The traumatic event of her mother's murder had a profound impact on Sarah. However, over time, she found the strength to rebuild her life. Sarah pursued further education, pursued a writing career, and eventually published a book chronicling her mother's murder, compiling all the available information. Furthermore, while writing the book, Sarah discovered new facts about the case that the police had overlooked. She discovered that Michael often borrowed his father's car, a black Ford pickup with New Hampshire license plates. This information was important because a witness had previously reported seeing a similar car near Crystal's house on the night of the murder. Another witness also reported seeing a car with its high beams speeding past her house that night. She initially thought the police were headed for her boyfriend's house because she mistook the sirens of an ambulance for police sirens. The woman's boyfriend was revealed to be Michael. The police had recorded his name and address in the report. However, they did not investigate him further at that time. Had the police investigated him further, they might have discovered the cut on his hand, potentially solving the case sooner. Unfortunately, past events cannot be changed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alicia Ross. Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in the Canadian city of Markham, in the province of Ontario. There's no information about her biological parents. All that's known is that they gave up their rights over the girl, and she was adopted a few months later by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents surrounded her with love and care, doing everything they could to ensure their daughter lacked for nothing and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started going to school, her adoptive parents decided to get divorced, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to support together in their daughter's life. Shortly after, Sharon remarried, and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated her as if she were his own daughter. Alicia did well in school, excelled at drawing, and also had a passion for photography, enjoying discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university. In the summer of 2005, Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends. She enjoyed spending time in nature, away from the busy city life. During the trip, she met a 29-year-old man named Sean, and they started a romantic relationship. The age difference of 4 years did not bother the couple. At the time, Alicia still lived in her adoptive parents' home, occupying the basement with a separate entrance, which allowed her to live independently from her parents. On August 16th, Alicia took a walk in the park with her adoptive mother and their dogs. Alicia seemed happy and shared that she was about to be promoted to the position of senior sales manager at work. She was very proud as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were finally paying off. Additionally, Alicia talked to her mother about her boyfriend, Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month but she seemed deeply in love with. Alicia hoped that this romance could develop into something more significant in the future and expressed a desire to introduce Sean to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After a stroll through the park, Sharon headed home, and Alicia went out on a date with her sweetheart, promising not to stay out too late because she had to get up early for work the next day. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. After meeting with Sean, Alicia invited him to her house. They had a good time together, and around midnight, he went home. Alicia accompanied him to the door, which served as a second exit from the backyard. They said goodbye with a kiss, and then he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't answer the phone. He wasn't too worried, thinking that Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't answer, he genuinely became concerned and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office as Alicia. From her, he learned that Alicia had not gone to work, and he immediately rushed to her house. On the morning of August 17th, Sharon and Julius left their home around 10 a.m. to play golf with friends. They noticed their daughter's car in the driveway but assumed a colleague had picked her up, so they didn't think much of it and continued with their plans. About half an hour later, Sean arrived at the Ross residence and, finding no sign of Alicia there, he called the police to report her as a missing person. Sean also immediately contacted Sharon to inform her of the situation. Sharon and Julius rushed home immediately after hearing the news. By the time they arrived, the police were already present at the scene. Sean was the first person to notice the girl's disappearance and inform the authorities. Sean was also the last person to see Alicia alive and well the evening before she vanished. According to Sean, they had said goodbye at the gate where his car was parked around midnight, and she had not been in touch since then. When Sharon and Julius reached the house, law enforcement was already there, investigating the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. Sean appeared visibly nervous and distraught. When the mother checked Alicia's room, she noticed that all of her daughter's personal belongings were still in their place. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, bank cards, and cash were all left behind. The gate was open but not forced, suggesting that she either let her abductor in or willingly left the yard with someone. In the backyard, the police found some signs of disturbance. The lawn and flowers in one spot were trampled, as if someone had fallen there. Additionally, a pair of cigarettes and Alicia's right sandal, which she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand. Sean was considered the prime suspect almost immediately. At first, he was clearly very nervous and his narration seemed a bit confusing and disjointed. Second, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they hadn't seen her either. Therefore, he definitely knew she was missing. Moreover, the authorities found biological traces of Sean and her on her bed. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia may have rejected Sean's advances, and he decided to force himself on her, then trying to cover his tracks and staging her disappearance, which likely resulted in her losing her life. Sean was brought to the police station and questioned. The investigator presented their theory to him, which left the young man stunned. He was dismayed to be the prime suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend, as he loved her. Sean admitted they had intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. Her parents had nothing bad to say about Sean. He hadn't argued with their daughter, hadn't mistreated her, and she spoke only well of him. Their relationship was progressing rapidly and quite happily, and Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. It's understandable that the parents are deeply concerned about their daughter's disappearance. The facts known so far suggest that she had no plans or reasons to leave her apartment. She was looking forward to a promotion at her workplace, and as a responsible person, it's unlikely she would have just abandoned everything. Even if there had been unforeseen circumstances, she would have surely informed her parents and taken her documents, money, and phone with her. The police couldn't find sufficient evidence to arrest Sean, so he was released after questioning. However, the investigators haven't completely ruled out Sean as a suspect and are continuing to monitor him. Sean himself seemed depressed and very disturbed. An intensive search for Alicia began the day after she went missing. Initially, a thorough inspection of the house and yard was conducted. Investigators examined the surrounding area in detail and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported having heard or seen anything suspicious that night. The authorities theorized that the woman disappeared sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean, and dawn, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it difficult to find witnesses. Flyers with Alicia's photos were distributed throughout the city, listing the phone numbers where people could provide any information about her whereabouts. The search for Alicia became one of the most extensive operations in the history of Ontario. Every rugged terrain, ravine, and swampy area were examined, but no clues, leads, or even suggestions about the whereabouts of the missing woman were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was still alive but was being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to do her any harm. The police leaned towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had kidnapped her and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, the absence of evidence of entry, and the fact that the door had been left open, but no concrete clues were found. The cigarette found on the floor had only a very smudged fingerprint that could not be identified. Investigators thoroughly reviewed Alicia's contacts and analyzed all calls and messages from her phone and email, but nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the 6th day of the search, the case was officially classified as a criminal offense, even though there was a lack of evidence, and Sean remained the main suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house about 10 miles from Alicia's house. After realizing that public suspicion had increased following his media appearance, he no longer participated in the search and refused to speak to the press. The investigators questioned Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, further convincing the police that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was pulled over late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculation arose that he was drowning his guilt in alcohol. After Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not met him personally and only knew of him through their daughter's stories. They believed she was happy, but now Sharon considered the possibility that she may have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, despite having planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. The police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or washing his car. However, these investigations did not yield any significant information. The detectives were left hoping that Sean would eventually confess everything. About a month after Alicia's disappearance, there was an unexpected development in the case. The initial media attention surrounding her case began to wane, and the search efforts continued but were no longer prominently featured in news reports. The investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. Then, on September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Alicia went missing, a completely unexpected twist occurred. A 31-year-old local resident named Daniel contacted the police and confessed to ending Alicia's life, providing the location where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man was never under suspicion, and the police had not considered him at all during their investigation. Initially, it seemed that the man simply craved fame and attention, and therefore decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police found her body in the location he had indicated. Before delving into who this new person of interest was, let's examine why the police had not shown any interest in him previously. Daniel was an unemployed inmate who lived in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Alicia family's home. Their house were separated by unkempt shrubs, forming an almost impenetrable barrier. Although the criminal and the victim had lived practically their entire lives right next to each other, they had never interacted before. Alicia had observed Daniel behaving in an unusual manner on his house, leading her to believe he might be mentally unwell. Daniel had experienced significant socialization issues from a young age. He lacked friends, was mocked at school, and all his attempts to form relationships were unsuccessful, causing him to develop a deep resentment towards women. As a child, girls had rejected him, calling him a loser and refusing to associate with him. At the age of 8, Daniel was diagnosed with a socializing behavioral disorder and had been receiving ongoing psychological treatment. Although therapy did not significantly improve his condition, during his teenage years, he confessed to having fantasies of suddenly attacking and overpowering a girl, which excited him. However, specialists remained confident that these fantasies would remain within his imagination. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions and decided not to continue his education. He became a recluse, living in his mother's house and isolating himself from the outside world. Daniel spent most of his days in his room, often visiting adult websites. Occasionally, he would venture out in the evenings to secretly observe his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He seemed particularly interested in watching when someone was engaged in intimate activities, which excited him. Daniel initially claimed that Alicia's death was accidental and he hid the body to avoid punishment. He said that when he realized she showed no signs of life, he placed her body in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding it in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, confirming Daniel's guilt. The condition of the remains suggested the girl had been treated with extreme cruelty. Alicia seemed to have been hit by a vehicle. The forensic examination revealed that she had almost all of her ribs broken, her neck and both arms fractured, and extensive closed head trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic experts were surprised, as they had never seen anything like it before. It was necessary to clarify all the circumstances and the timeline of events that fateful night to precisely determine how Alicia suffered such injuries. Initially, the convicted man claimed he had had an argument with his neighbor on a path covered in bushes between their houses. At some point during the verbal altercation, she called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck her in the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. When he realized she wasn't breathing, he decided to hide the body and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, there was something in his story that didn't add up. There were missing details and specifics. For example, it wasn't clear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they started arguing, what caused such a brutal beating, and why the evidence found at the scene was arranged in a straight line. Restoring the full picture of events was challenging, but law enforcement managed to do so. That evening, Daniel went to spy on his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, so he approached their house closely. As the couple was being intimate, he watched them from a window. Then he moved back to the bushes but did not leave. Closer to midnight, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the lurking neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert, and demanded that he leave immediately. Finally, Alicia called him a loser, after which she turned around and was about to go back into the house. This is a very disturbing and violent incident. The victim was subjected to a brutal physical assault, with the perpetrator striking her numerous times in the head, neck, chest, and back, causing extensive injuries and internal bleeding. After realizing the victim had died, the perpetrator moved the body to his garage, stripped her naked, and masturbated. He then placed the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and transported it to a remote location outside the city. This sequence of events indicates a severe lack of empathy and disregard for human life. The language used is graphic and unsettling, but necessary to convey the gravity of the situation. Upon returning to his home, the criminal took a shower, changed his clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, as well as the personal belongings of the victim and the towels he used to clean the crime scene, were bagged and disposed of. The trial and sentencing only began in April 2007, when new details were made public. The accused confessed to having taken the life of his neighbor, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was an involuntary act. Additionally, the defense requested a psychiatric evaluation, indicating that Daniel was ill and should not be considered responsible for his actions, suggesting that he should be treated in a clinic rather than incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that, despite his mental illness and issues with anger management, Daniel acted with full awareness of the consequences of his actions. He ruthlessly kicked Alicia with all his might, knowing that this would likely result in her death. Nevertheless, the court-ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the accused could be fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never admitted to having placed them in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, Daniel Sylvester was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which portrayed the events from the perspective of Alicia during the final moments of her life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born in the late 1980s into a warm and united family. Her family lived in a spacious home that comfortably accommodated. Her parents, Alejandro and Marcela, nurtured their 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, creating a warm environment filled with care and attention. The children were generally kind and well-behaved, rarely causing trouble. However, Antonia distinguished herself from her siblings with her exceptional perceptiveness, sense of responsibility, and ambition from an early age, making her a special source of pride for her parents. Antonia was a top student who had a good relationship with her teachers and clear future goals. She dreamed of traveling and leading a fulfilling life. After graduating high school, she was accepted into her preferred university and began studying a popular major. As a freshman, she focused on mastering the fundamentals of her future career, while also engaging in social and academic events, where she made new friends who shared her interests and ambitions. One of her closest friends was Consuela Uribe, a law student. They enjoyed spending time together, going out, shopping, and attending parties. This brings them even close. Martin was born and raised in Tomoko, Chile, the same city as Antonia. He comes from a large family, including parents, a sister, and a brother. When he was young, he had a child with a woman named Daniela Alvarez, but their relationship ended shortly right after they give birth. From 2015 to 2017, Antonia and Martin communicated through a social network. At that time, Antonia was a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's photos, but their interactions were limited to online communication. Eventually, they met in person, which sadly resulted in a tragic outcome. When Antonia broke up with her boyfriend Rodrigo, Consuela suggested that she find a way to distract herself from the sadness. Struggling with the breakup, Antonia decided to take her friend's advice to help clear her mind and forget her troubles for a while. They planned a trip to celebrate Chile's Independence Day on September 18th, choosing the tourist town of Pucón as their destination. By chance, Antonia encountered Martin there. He was in Pucón to attend an electronic music festival at a local club called Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was performing. On September 17th, around 6:30 p.m., Consuela, Antonia, and 3 friends, including Consuela's boyfriend, headed to Pucón. The trip went well, and upon arrival, they stayed in different accommodations. The girls stayed at a summer house owned by the Consuela family. After 8 p.m., they started getting ready for a party at the popular venue, Black Room, which promised to be an unforgettable experience. Before leaving, Antonia messaged her father, Alejandro, who reminded her to be careful and cautious with strangers. She replied, assuring him that being prudent was her top priority. Antonia and Consuela got ready and went to the club, where they ordered food and drinks. Antonia and Martin had a great time chatting and dancing. The Black Room Club turned out to be the perfect place for their unexpected reunion. They were delighted by this chance meeting and spent the evening together, enjoying each other's company. It was clear they had a mutual affection. Antonia would occasionally join Consuela and greet the male acquaintances she had traveled with, moving between different bars. However, she didn't realize how much she had consumed. The combination of the long drive and an empty stomach contributed to her inebriation, which was unusual for her. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found her friend Antonia happily chatting with a mutual acquaintance, Emilio. Consuela suggested it was time to leave, but Antonia insisted on staying, feeling good and wanting to enjoy the night longer. Despite Consuela's advice to stop drinking and rethink her choice, Antonia remained determined to stay at the club while Consuela went home. This decision would later prove to be a mistake for Antonia. Emilio, who was there, became a witness to what happened next and provided details during the investigation and in court. He observed that Martin approached Antonia, started a conversation, and then took her by the hand to lead her toward the exit. Emilio noticed that Antonia was acting strangely. He wasn't sure if Antonia was participating in the conversation or simply confused by the alcohol. However, she didn't seem to mind being taken away, or maybe she didn't even realize it was happening. Emilio believed that Martin had asked her to join him and that she had agreed. However, the external surveillance footage revealed a different version of events. Martin's friends reported that they left the club in 2 cars, but there wasn't enough space for Martin and Antonia in either vehicle, so they decided to walk. As they walked, they encountered a store. Surveillance footage showed that Martin forced Antonia to go inside. she was unsteady and unable to fight back. Martin, who was a bit more sober, managed to exert some control over the situation. They were recorded on camera multiple times throughout the night. During their time together, Martin was overly affectionate and attempted to kiss Antonia, but she did not reciprocate and tried to stay away. Once they arrived at the rented house, the other friends paid little attention to she. Only Barbara, a 19-year-old who had just joined and wasn't drinking, noticed that the couple appeared to be drunk. Later, they went upstairs. Around 9 a.m., Consuela received a voice message from Antonia. At first, she found it difficult to understand the message. After listening closely, she deciphered that Antonia was asking to be picked up. Since Antonia couldn't share her exact location, Consuela used GPS to locate her. Consuela and her boyfriend, Jose, then headed to the specified location. When Consuela and Jose entered the house, they found Martin naked and using a pillow to cover himself. Consuela asked him where Antonia was, but he said he didn't know. They then went upstairs and discovered Antonia in a bedroom, lying on the bed in her underwear and quietly crying. Jose picked her up and took her to the car. Consuela asked what had happened, but Antonia could only cry sob. Consuela and Jose tried to comfort her by hugging her and encouraging her to talk. Once they arrived back at the summer house, Antonia opened up about everything. She revealed that Martin had taken advantage of her against her will, leaving her feeling helpless. Though her memories were blurry, she clearly understood that he had harmed her. This incident had taken place when they went upstairs, and afterward, he left her alone and vanished. After hearing about the incident, Jose and Consuela urged Antonia to report Martin to the police and seek justice. However, she was too afraid that her parents and the public would find out, so she decided to silently cope with her trauma and heal on her own. She asked them not to tell anyone about what happened. Then, Antonia received a message from her father checking in on her and joking about whether she had been drinking too much. To avoid raising suspicion, Consuela responded casually, which unintentionally revealed her true feelings. The next day, Antonia met with Martin to discuss what had happened, but he was dismissive and arrogant, insisting that the previous night's incidents were consensual. At that moment, Antonia understood that she would not receive the truth or an apology from him, and she knew she had to try to get through it. Antonia was suffering from intimacy trauma syndrome, which affects her physical, emotional, cognitive, and social behaviors. This condition can manifest right after a traumatic incident or even months or years later. Antonia was going through an intense phase of this syndrome alone, unable to escape feelings of distress, distraction, anxiety, and confusion, often alternating with hysterical outbursts and crying. Antonia experienced a strong desire to cleanse herself, which caused her nausea and occasional vomiting. For 3 weeks, she kept to herself and tried to behave as if everything was normal. A childhood friend remarked that they hadn't noticed anything unusual about her, but her classmates were aware of her memory loss and disorganization linked to the syndrome. One classmate noted that her grades had fallen, which was unexpected for someone who had always been a dedicated student. When asked about the cause, Antonia said that it to her poor health. Her terrible secret somehow got revealed to an ex-boyfriend, Rodrigo, but the details he received were distorted and negative. He quickly reported this to others. Antonia insisted she was not responsible for what had happened, claiming the information he had was greatly exaggerated, but he did not believe her. To make matters worse, the day before indents, Martin had called her, and it's unclear what they discussed, though it might have included threats from him. On the evening of October 13, 2019, Antonia family could never have imagined how the day would end. Carla, visiting their parents' home, went upstairs to greet her sister Antonia, expecting a simple conversation. However, when she found Antonia seemingly asleep, Carla decided not to disturb her and moved toward the door. Just before leaving, she heard Antonia ask about their mother and request the light to be turned off. After telling Carla she loved her, Antonia turned her face away. Carla thought maybe Antonia just tired or not in the mood. But she didn't know that Antonia was suffering from painful thoughts, making her feel that there was only one way to escape her suffering. By 7 p.m. that evening, Antonia's mother, Marcella, noticed there was no response coming from Antonia's room. When Marcella went in, she was met with a horrifying sight. Her daughter was hanging motionless above the floor. Marcella rushed to Antonia but found no signs of life. Stunned by the tragedy, she called for help from neighbors. Family friends assisted in taking down the body and contacted emergency services. Soon after, Antonia's father, Alejandro, spoke to the media, promising to discover the reasons behind his daughter's tragic choice and to pursue justice. Antonia was known for her lively personality and intelligence, indicating that something significant had deeply affected her. The autopsy later confirmed that she had died from self-strangulation. The situation required urgent action. Without waiting for official investigations, Antonia's parents took matters into their own hands and started their own inquiry. They hired private detectives who carefully reconstructed the last days of Antonia's life and discovered the person responsible for her distress. Alejandro and Marcela quickly reported Martin Pradenas to the police, suspecting him of being the culprit. Law enforcement officials interviewed Martin multiple times, but he maintained that he did nothing wrong concerning Antonia. He asserted that their relationship was consensual and he denied any involvement in her tragic death. However, detectives had a different viewpoint and gathered evidence that contradicted his statements. The investigation revealed that Martin left Pucón on September 17 around noon with friends, and they intended to return the following day. Once they arrived at their destination, the group hosted a party at a rented house, filled with conversation, laughter, and, of course, alcohol. A few hours before Antonia passed away, she sent a goodbye message to Rodrigo and shared a childhood video in a family chat. In the video, Antonia was dancing and laughing happily, which highlighted how much she longed for her younger self. She realized she could never go back to her previous life. This tragedy has deeply affected everyone. Thanks to Alejandro, who found the courage to share his daughter's story on a national level, Antonia's tragedy began to resonate with the public. Her name appeared on posters, social media hashtags, and even on building walls. Public support has had a big impact. Within a week, several women came forward with similar allegations against Martin. 6 new charges were filed against him, detailing actions he took from 2010 to 2019. Ultimately, Martin was arrested for these crimes. Meanwhile, his family sought to protect their personal information, which had been leaked online. They claimed that their constitutional right to privacy was violated due to numerous insults, aggressive messages, and false information circulating online. The Martin family suspected the Antonia family of being involved in these leaks. On June 12, 2020, the Temuco court granted the Martin family's request, according to which, the Antonia family is not allowed to share any information about the Martin family on social media and to refrain from making damaging posts. The ruling has angered Chileans who feel it unfairly protected Martin. On July 21, the Antonia family appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, but their appeal was denied. Later that month, the lawyer for Martin filed a request for protective measures for his client. During the same period, he was formally charged with multiple attacks. Public anger in Chile intensified, leading to the investigation being referred to as the Antonia case. This case has come to represent the fight for justice for victims of violence. Many women, having stayed silent for years, started to share their own experiences. On July 22, the court decided to change Martin's preventive measure. He was transferred from detention to house arrest, that is, released from custody. The judge clarified that this decision did not reflect the final punishment. Although the prosecutor charged Martin with 5 counts of misconduct, the court only recognized 2 of them. This decision sparked massive protests across the country, with thousands of people taking to the streets in outrage over the halt of investigations into certain matters and the decision to place Martin under house arrest. In response to public outcry, the authorities filed a request with the appeals court. The judiciary acted quickly, revoking the house arrest and rearresting Martin. Later, the same court removed the statute of limitations for 2 cases of intimate violence. Meanwhile, Alejandro, along with feminist organizations, was working on a bill to establish penalties for such crimes. He stressed that everyone should be concerned when a woman is taken away by a man without resistance, particularly if she is intoxicated. He highlighted the necessity of taking action in these situations, as this vulnerability puts women at risk of becoming victims. The investigation progressed, and in February 2021, Martin's phone was found. Forensic analysis revealed that it contained photos of women's underwear, indicating that he took pride in his actions and kept records of them. The police report was extensive, totaling nearly 400 pages, and included statements from victims, witnesses, and people who knew both Martin and Antonia, including childhood acquaintances. Martin's former teacher described him as a bright and cheerful child, although he showed a strong interest in intimate subjects. Some women recalled that he had touched them when they were young, but at the time, no one considered it significant since they were all children. On June 14, 2022, the criminal court in Temuco began hearings that were expected to last over a month. During this time, the prosecution presented evidence, expert testimonies, and witness statements. Video footage clearly showed that Antonia could not control the situation. On August 26, Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes related to intimacy and aggressive behavior. However, on December 29, the Supreme Court accepted the defense's appeal, disagreeing with the original verdict, and a new trial was set for spring 2023. On March 16, the defendant's legal team withdrew from case, and public defense took over his case. On April 24, 2024, his second trial began, addressing 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of sexual assault. During the trial, Martin chose to speak and described what happened. He attributed his actions to the severe effects of alcohol. However, prosecutors argued that his drinking with the women made them vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, he was found guilty. The federal prosecution requested a 41-year prison sentence for Martin Pradines. On July 28, 2023, the 31-year-old was sentenced to 17 years in prison for 7 offenses related to sexual intimacy involving 6 victims. After accounting for the time he had already spent in custody, he would serve 14 years. The tragic case of Antonia highlighted the danger posed by Martin. It remains unclear how many other innocent women may have been affected by his actions. The line between harassment and flirting is very thin, and one can never anticipate when someone might cross that dangerous boundary. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Brittany McGlone. Brittany McGlone was born in 1987 to Gary and Patricia McGlone in Gordo, New Mexico. When she was young, the family moved to Winsport, a small town in northwest Texas with fewer than 4,000 residents. After the move, her parents divorced, and Brittany stayed with her mother. Her father later remarried and had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Brittany formed a close bond with her half-younger sister, Hope, who was 3 years younger. Although they lived in different states, the two sisters often talked on the phone and cherished spending time together during the holidays. Brittany was a kind, happy girl with a great sense of humor and an optimistic outlook on life. She helped her mother with housework, cared for her sick grandmother, and visited her father to help care for her half-siblings. Brittany graduated from high school in 2006 and worked 2 jobs at different stores. She intended to save money to attend nursing school. Unfortunately, her plans were cut short when she was tragically murdered. At the time, she was in a relationship with Jeff Stogner, her first love. However, Jeff had a history of using illegal drugs, and he was known for being rude, tough, and rebellious. Despite her family's concerns and her mother's warnings about dating someone like him, Brittany continued the relationship. Their relationship was often tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments, and Jeff subjected Brittany to both physical and emotional abuse. Brittany ended her relationship with Jeff in April 2007, but they stayed in touch. By May, they got back together, which upset her mother. On the morning of Friday, May 4, 2007, Brittany finished her shift early at 7 a.m. She informed her mother that she would go directly to Jeff's house to sleep after her night shift, as Jeff had requested her to come over right away. Normally, Brittany would come home first, shower, rest, and have lunch before visiting him. Patricia was surprised by the sudden change in her daughter's plans but accepted it. Brittany arrived at Jeff's house before 8 a.m., where his family was present, including his parents, siblings, and his sister's boyfriend, Chad Carr. Shortly after she arrived, Jeff's mother went to work, his siblings left with their children, and Jeff and his stepfather headed to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to pick up Brittany's grandparents. Brittany lay down to sleep, needing to rest before going to work. While she slept, her mother, Patricia, kept trying to call her, but Brittany didn't answer. After 8 a.m., Patricia assumed her daughter was still sleeping and didn't think much of it. Around 3 p.m., Jeff called Brittany's house. Patricia answered the phone and Jeff asked if Brittany was home. Patricia was surprised and replied that Brittany wasn't home. Worried, she hung up and started calling Brittany's cell phone, but all the calls went straight to voicemail. Despite trying several times, Brittany didn't answer. Patricia was confused and worried because her daughter wasn't answering her phone. Patricia called Jeff again, and he explained that Brittany had been at his house when he left and was sound asleep. He assured her that Brittany was probably still sleeping and hadn't heard the calls. Patricia then asked why he had invited Brittany over if he planned to leave, but Jeff didn't respond. As he arrived home, he spotted Brittany's car and reassured Patricia that she was with him. Feeling relieved, Patricia asks him to tell Brittany to call her mother when she wakes up. That day, Patricia did not receive any calls from Jeff or her daughter. Later, 2 police officers knocked on her door. When she answered, they inquired about someone named Brenda or Debbie. Patricia didn't recognize those names, so the officers left, leaving her feeling unsettled. Worried, she called the sheriff to find out why the police had visited and who they were looking for. The sheriff asked her to stay home and promised that they would return. Eventually, the police clarified that they had mixed up the names and informed Patricia that Brittany was dead. Her body had been taken to a funeral home. Shocked, Patricia tried to get more information from the officers, but they would not share any details. Immediately, she feared that Jeff had harmed her daughter. Determined to know the truth, she went to the funeral home to identify Brittany's body and learn what had happened. There, she discovered that her daughter had been brutally murdered in her sleep. Overwhelmed by the news, Patricia could only think about her warnings to her daughter to avoid dangerous people. Eventually, Patricia began pressing the police for answers about the events at Jeff's house and her daughter's death. Jeff reported that when he arrived home, he found her car still parked outside. He assumed she was still asleep. However, when Jeff entered his bedroom, he discovered a horrifying scene. Brittany, covered in blood, and lying motionless on the bed. He quickly called 911 to report what he had seen. Patricia did not believe the story and decided to call Jeff herself. While waiting for answers, she demanded to know the truth. Jeff repeated the same story to her. Patricia then asked why he hadn't called her immediately to inform her about the murder. He explained that he was afraid to share such alarming news. When the police arrived, they assured that they would notify the relatives of the victim. Brittany's family was devastated by the news. Forensic experts began investigating the crime scene. Even experienced police officers were shocked by the brazen murder, as they had never seen anything like it before. Blood was everywhere in the room, seeping through the mattress and spreading across the floor. Forensic experts collected DNA samples from the scene, but they could not find a murder weapon, nor any signs of forced entry. This suggested that Brittany had let the attacker into the house, or the door was unlocked. Jeff was unsure whether the door was actually closed. He speculated that they may have left the back door open, a common occurrence in their sleepy town. Her work clothes were neatly folded next to the bed, but her pajamas and underwear were missing. It was reported that the perpetrator had torn off her clothes and raped her. Brittany's autopsy revealed severe head injuries. The medical examiner determined that Brittany had been beaten to death, with the cause of death being blunt force trauma, possibly a crowbar. Since no defensive wounds were found on her body, it was suggested that Brittany had been asleep during the attack and was unable to defend herself. It was also confirmed that she had been raped. The crime was believed to have a sexual motive. Jeff's DNA was found at the crime scene because he lived in the house, where his family often visited him. His friends also frequently came over, leaving their DNA in his room. The presence of multiple DNA samples made the investigation more complicated, and Jeff became the main suspect. He and his father discovered the girl's body and were the last people to see her alive, leading police to have many questions for him. Jeff was taken to the station for questioning. He shared his background with the police and insisted he was not involved in the murder. However, he was arrested for a different offense because he was on parole and had violated its terms. At that time, he was not charged with Brittany's murder. Police interviewed Patricia's mother to gather information about Brittany's relationship with Jeff. She explained that they had only been dating for 6 months, during which time they often argued. Jeff sometimes used drugs, which caused him to distance himself from her. His mother did not approve of their relationship. At one point, the couple broke up, but they later reconciled because Brittany loved him deeply and felt she could not live without him. Their relationship was toxic and unhealthy. On Tuesday, May 8, 2007, Brittany's family chose not to have a closed casket for her funeral due to the severe injuries on her face. They kindly requested that Jeff and his family stay away from the ceremony, believing he was involved in her death. However, Jeff ignored this request and attended the funeral with his family. They were not allowed to attend the ceremony, leading to an argument between Jeff's family and Brittany's relatives. This behavior upset Brittany's family and made the ceremony worse. Jeff tried to share how he had trouble sleeping in the blood-soaked bed after Brittany's murder. Brittany's family was furious and believed he was involved in the case. However, Jeff was later cleared of all suspicion. He and his father passed a lie detector test, and his alibi was confirmed by witnesses, surveillance cameras, and cell phone records. Police discovered that Jeff's phone had connected to another cell tower and his image was captured on surveillance cameras at 2 gas stations. The exact time of the Brittany's death is unclear. According to the timeline, Brittany was killed during the 7 hours when Jeff was not at home. However, there were periods when Jeff's whereabouts were unknown. He could have returned home at any time to kill Brittany or may have killed her earlier in the morning before leaving to create an alibi. The mother was unable to reach her daughter by phone that morning but thought nothing of it, assuming Brittany was still asleep, though she might have already been dead. Additionally, it raised suspicions that Jeff stopped at 2 gas stations located next to each other. The family believed he did this to ensure at least one gas station's surveillance cameras captured him, providing a potential alibi. Because of this, they felt his alibi was unreliable. Jeff's behavior that day was odd to them, and they questioned why he suddenly called Brittany to his place early in the morning. Why would he want her to sleep alone at his house when he was leaving? She could have stayed at his house, and they could have met up later. That doesn't make sense. Plus, Brittany's family suspects others, especially Chad Carr, Jeff's sister's boyfriend. They were also in the house the morning of the murder. Chad and Jeff's sister were out somewhere together, but he has no alibi. Chad knew that Jeff's family often left the back door open, and that day he went home, showered, changed clothes, and then went back to Jeff's house. Why would he need to change clothes in broad daylight, and he had never done so before? Most importantly, he had problems with the law. He was involved in robberies and had once attacked and severely beaten his ex-wife, which resulted in him serving 4 years in prison. At the time he was in prison, his wife had divorced him, so Brittany's family suspected that he was involved in the murder. Brittany's family asked the police to check on this guy, and he was summoned for questioning. Chad denied any involvement in the crime and was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take but failed. However, this failure was not considered evidence, so he was released. At that time, the police had no evidence against Jeff and Chad, and they were not even regarded as suspects. Chad's ex-wife, Britt, contacted the police, alleging that he had abused her. It was revealed that in 2006, he had been released from prison and asked Britt to bring their child to him. She complied, but Chad reacted violently, attacking her with a baton, kidnapping their daughter, and raping Britt. She later filed a complaint, which resulted in Chad being imprisoned for 8 years. After Brittany's murder, Britt viewed Chad as cruel and aggressive, believing he was capable of killing. Brittany's family overlooked Jeff's strange social media posts and inappropriate jokes about murders, which seemed to mock Brittany's memory. It raised suspicion when Jeff's family moved to another house and the murder scene was demolished. Brittany's family thought this indicated they were hiding something, leading them to suspect the demolition was a way to obscure the truth. There were allegations that Jeff had been dealing drugs from that house. It's possible Brittany discovered this or threatened to report him, which might have made her a target for elimination as a witness. Brittany's family called for justice from the police, but the investigation stalled and the case went cold. Initially, the police mishandled the evidence collection at the crime scene and allowed Jeff's family to enter the house, contaminating the area. They also failed to investigate around the house or search the nearby lake for the murder weapon. In 2017, the sheriff and his deputy were charged with falsifying evidence and providing false testimony, leading to their removal from office. In December 2021, a new sheriff was elected. He met with Brittany's family and assured them that he would do his best to hold the criminal accountable for his actions. The new sheriff announced that his team was engaging with several parties involved in the case. The Brittany family felt hopeful that the criminals would be caught and punished. The sheriff and his deputies maintained regular communication with the family, keeping them updated on the investigation. Although Jeff's home, where the crime occurred, had been torn down, the sheriff stated that evidence, including blood stains and DNA, was collected on the first day of the investigation. He planned to re-examine this evidence using modern technology to find answers. The sheriff also intends to re-interview Jeff's entire family and other people involved and seek assistance from local residents. At the time, Jeff was not considered a suspect and was actively cooperating with the police, providing his alibi. Chad was released from prison in November 2020 after serving time again. On September 1, 2022, he was arrested in Dallas, 15 years after the murder of Brittany McGlone. He faces charges for her murder, and the death penalty is a potential outcome. Police collected evidence from Chad's home, including several items such as a pair of white shorts with blood stains, a gray ski mask, and 2 pairs of women's panties. The police chief stated that both old and new evidence contributed to Chad's recent arrest. Throughout the investigation, police always determined that Chad was the perpetrator, as all the evidence pointed to him. However, the specifics of this evidence have not been revealed. Chad is currently in jail awaiting trial and is facing the death penalty. Jeff maintains that he was not involved in Brittany's murder and believes that the accusations have destroyed his life. Many people view him as a murderer, which he finds hard to cope with. His personal life is challenging. He divorced his wife because he cannot move on from Brittany. However, Brittany's family does not believe Jeff's claims. They describe him as a narcissist who only loves himself and think that he tries to gain sympathy by portraying himself as a victim. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Amanda Perot. On February 3, 2020, Seth Perot called his boss, the sheriff, to report a tragic incident at his home. His wife had died and he needed help. When the police arrived, Seth had just gotten out of the shower. Inside the bedroom, they discovered the body of 44-year-old Amanda on the bed, shot in the head. Initially, the scene appeared to match Seth's description on the phone. Then forensic experts began combing the area and collecting evidence. Seth was taken to the police station to give a statement. He said that he and his wife, Amanda, were lying in bed when they got into an argument. During the argument, Amanda suddenly pulled out a gun and shot herself in the head. Seth said that he had no time to react and stop her. When questioned by police, he described their day before the tragedy. They had dropped their children off at school and had not been anywhere else until the incident. Seth appeared extremely upset, almost in tears, expressing regret for losing the woman he loved more than anything after 8 happy years together. Initially, Seth said he had not touched Amanda. However, he later said he had hugged her several times after the shooting. He struggled to remember whether he had touched the gun and repeatedly claimed that he was a good cop. The police asked him more questions, leading to increasing doubts about his credibility. They knew that Seth, who had come from another police department, had a bad reputation and was known for aggressive behavior at work. When Amanda's relatives heard about the tragedy, they rushed to the house and informed the police that Amanda would never act in such a way or leave her children with an abusive husband. They were convinced that Seth had killed Amanda and urged the police to investigate the possibility. Meanwhile, forensic experts thoroughly examined the crime scene and concluded that it was a homicide. Their findings were supported by the location of the body and the gun. A .380 caliber Smith & Wesson was discovered nearby, with a discarded magazine found next to her right side. A bullet was found in the chamber of the semi-automatic pistol. When the gun is fired, the spent cartridge case is ejected, and a new cartridge is loaded. Because there was a bullet in the chamber, the magazine should have been removed after the shot was fired. If the gun was functioning properly, the magazine could only be ejected by pressing a button, which would have had to be done after the shot. However, if the Amanda died immediately, who pressed the button? The weapon was tested and found to have no faults. Additionally, there was no blood on Amanda's hands or on the long sleeves of her shirt. The bedroom contained 20 miniature whiskey bottles, and there were no signs of forced entry or any intruders. The primary suspect was the Seth. He was a police officer trained to use a gun, and the murder was carried out with his service weapon. Police began investigating the couple's relationship more closely and discovered some interesting details. Amanda Perot was born in 1975 in Lawrenceville, Georgia, a small town with a population of about 29,000. Relatives described her as a cheerful and kind person, always willing to help others and devoted to her family. The Amanda had 2 children from her first marriage, which ended in a difficult divorce due to her ex-husband's abusive behavior. Amanda struggled to escape this toxic relationship. In 2011, after her divorce, Amanda met Seth online. At that time, Seth was seriously ill with cancer, unemployed, and living with his parents, who were supporting him financially. He loved communicating online, and when he discovered Amanda's profile, he felt intrigued. He contacted her and they started chatting. To Amanda, Seth seemed like the complete opposite of her ex-husband. He was sweet, polite, and kind. As their conversations continued, Amanda and Seth grew close and started considering a face-to-face meeting. Eventually, Seth's health improved, and his cancer went into remission. He invited Amanda to meet in person. And their date went well. They instantly liked each other and began dating. During this time, Amanda learns that Seth has a daughter from a previous marriage who lives with mother, and he is determined to fight for custody of the child. Amanda moved in with Seth's parents along with. They were pleased that Seth had finally found a partner and believed everything was going well. Amanda took on the responsibility of caring for Seth, which led her to drift away from her own family. 2 of her sisters noted that after the move, Amanda dedicated herself entirely to looking after Seth. She also worked and took care of her children, leaving her little time to connect with family and friends. It was a challenging period for Amanda, but she never complained. Seth insisted that Amanda quit her job to be with him all the time, and his fairly wealthy parents supported this decision. Over time, Amanda's relatives lost touch with her. She stopped attending family gatherings, missing Christmas and Thanksgiving. She also ceased to personally congratulate her relatives on their birthdays, choosing instead to do so only by phone. Amanda became focused entirely on Seth and the children, celebrating all holidays with his family. Seth then took Amanda's cell phone, saying she didn't need it because she was always home with him. Amanda didn't have a phone, so her family couldn't contact her. Seth controlled every aspect of Amanda's life and wouldn't let her leave the house alone. After 5 years together, Seth and Amanda secretly married on June 23, 2017. Only their children attended the wedding. They didn't invite anyone else or tell anyone about this important moment in Amanda's life. Many believe that Seth married Amanda primarily for his own interests. He was determined to gain custody of his daughter from his ex-wife, and to do this, he needed to formalize his relationship with Amanda. Many thought this was his true motivation for marrying her. Without this goal, he might not have married at all. Although Seth appeared happy with Amanda, he had complete control over her and was very persistent in getting his way. He spent months in court fighting for custody of his daughter. Eventually, he was successful and won full custody of his daughter, after which Seth took his daughter to live with them. Amanda had no say in family decisions and was completely submissive to his decisions. In 2018, Seth's father purchased a beautiful house for them near the lake, and the family moved in. Amanda remained a housewife, as Seth did not allow her to work. A year later, Seth secured a job as a patrolman with the Tenton Police Department. After Seth started his job, his relationship with Amanda deteriorated. He began drinking excessively after work. One night, he fell down the stairs while drunk and got hurt. This led him to misuse painkillers along with alcohol, causing him to become extremely irritable and aggressive. He often threatened Amanda physically. On January 28, 2020, after suffering another attack from her husband, Amanda escaped to a neighbor's house and called 911 for help. When the police arrived, Amanda showed them the bruises from the abuse. Their 3 children confirmed her story. Seth's 8-year-old daughter reported that she had heard screams and seen her father pushing and hitting Amanda. Terrified, she had hidden in the closet to avoid the violence. After Amanda fled, Seth discovered the children hiding and forced them to come out. They obeyed but were very frightened of him. Seth was then arrested and charged that evening. Amanda called her sister, asking for a ride the next morning because she was afraid to stay home, knowing that her husband would be released soon. The next morning, Seth was released on $1,500 bail and returned home. Amanda later called her sister back saying that she didn't need to come anymore because everything was fine. However, her sister was shocked, realizing how dangerous Seth was to Amanda and the children. She couldn't understand why Amanda continued to forgive him. Amanda's sister came to her house and tried to convince her to leave with the children and divorce Seth. Amanda was against this idea. Her sister then left. Seth was temporarily suspended during the investigation into allegations of domestic violence and child abuse. Amanda took part in the hearings related to Seth's case. When the judge asked if she wanted a restraining order against him, she declined, saying she had forgiven him. As a result, Seth was released, and they went home together. Just 5 days later, on February 3, 2020, Amanda was found dead. Police, after reviewing a history of conflict and domestic violence, concluded that Amanda's death was not an accident. They suspected Seth of shooting her. During questioning, Seth maintained his innocence, claiming that their argument was due to recent allegations of domestic violence. During the argument, she pulled out a gun and shot herself. The police questioned how Amanda could have accessed Seth's gun, given his strict nature and the control he had over her. Police later found a handwritten note on Amanda's nightstand in which she praised her husband and described his great character. In the note, she wrote, "Amanda Perot wants to retract her statement. Her husband has never raised a hand to hit her. She feels very bad for the humiliation she has caused him. She is willing to accept any punishment she deserves for her actions." However, Amanda's sister does not believe that Amanda would write such things about her husband. The handwriting on the note appears to be different from Amanda's usual style, raising concerns that she may not have written it herself, or that she wrote it under pressure or at the behest of her husband. Therefore, the handwriting appears unusual. Seth has a hard time explaining the bruises on Amanda's body. Police suspect that he coerced her into writing the letter to make her death appear voluntary, in an attempt to escape guilt. The investigation is ongoing, with police believing Seth shot his wife and actively gathering evidence against him. They have interviewed the couple's friends and family to uncover more about the history of domestic violence in their relationship. Neighbors reported hearing screams from the couple's house almost daily and often saw Seth intoxicated. The community was aware that the couple frequently argued, with Seth being the aggressor when he drank. Amanda, on the other hand, appeared to be a quiet and modest person, and neighbors never saw her drinking. There were multiple instances where neighbors witnessed Seth dragging Amanda by her hair in their driveway. Although they felt sympathy for her, no one called the police out of fear of Seth, who was a police officer himself. On the day Amanda died, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. There were no sounds coming from the house. The only witness to the events was Seth, whose testimony was not trusted during the investigation. It was revealed that just 20 minutes before Seth's call, a deputy police officer had shown up at their door with a summons for domestic violence. Video from the doorbell camera showed the officer approaching, introducing himself, and waiting for someone to answer. Although Seth heard noises inside, no one answered. The deputy police officer were puzzled by Seth's behavior, knowing that Seth was a police officer who knew the procedures. Seth only needed to hand over some documents, so the deputy police officer wondered why he was hiding and refusing to open the door. Initially, the deputy police officer thought that Seth might not be fully clothed, which could explain the lack of response. He turned his back to the door and asked Seth to simply hand over the documents without looking inside, but still no one responded. This was unusual. After waiting another 7 minutes, the deputy police officer left. They later speculated that when Seth saw the police at the door, he became frightened. Apparently, a shot was fired just before the deputy police officer arrived. After the deputy left, he took a few minutes to calm down and then called his sheriff on his cell phone. Police later discovered that Seth had lied about not leaving the house on the day of the murder. Police reviewed surveillance cameras from the area and the couple's bank card transactions, finding that they had gone to a store 10 miles from their home that day and purchased 20 bottles of liquor. More importantly, the cameras recorded what the Seth was wearing, a Pink Floyd t-shirt and black sweatpants. 4 hours later, when police arrived at the Peralt's home, Seth was wearing different clothes. A plain black t-shirt and the clothes he had worn to the store were found in a washing machine, which had been turned off. In addition, Seth was still wet from his shower. Police suspected that he may have tried to wash off gunpowder residue and blood that may have gotten on him during the shooting, but he had not started the washing cycle. A small smear of Amanda's blood was later found on his pants, and traces of gunpowder were discovered on Seth's left hand. Based on this evidence, the investigation resumed just 2 days after the tragedy on February 5 in 2020. Seth was arrested for the murder of Amanda Perot. He denied any involvement in her death and also refuted allegations of domestic violence. The couple's 3 children were interviewed by child psychologists, and all 3 reported that Seth frequently abused their mother in front of them. The day before Amanda's death, she urged the children not to speak to the police, warning them that Seth might lose custody of their daughter and could retaliate violently. The children lived in constant fear of him. Their testimonies were presented as evidence during the trial. Seth's daughter requested to move in with her mother, and this request was granted, while Amanda's other children stayed with her sister throughout the trial. On August 21, 2020, something unexpected occurred. The autopsy report was released. The state medical examiner concluded that Amanda Perot had shot herself, citing the absence of struggle signs and the burns on her skin from the gunshot. This finding shocked the prosecution, who disagreed with the forensic expert's assessment. The trial began on November 3, 2020, with the prosecution presenting all the evidence that Seth was guilty: gunpowder residue on his hands, blood on his unwashed clothes, discrepancies in the placement of Amanda's body in the gun, and most importantly, Seth's motive for killing his wife. Despite this evidence, Seth maintained his innocence. His attorney argued that changing clothes and showering were not important. Seth simply chose to shower during the day and made no attempt to hide anything. The bloodstain may have been from a previous incident where Amanda accidentally hurt herself. However, the presence of gunpowder on Seth's hands was unexplained. It was suggested he might have gotten it while at the police station. The lawyer pointed out that even the state medical examiner concluded Amanda shot herself, as there were no clear signs of a struggle. While burns on her body indicated she was shot from a close distance, the prosecutor claimed that Seth had given her alcohol and drugs, preventing her from defending herself. Amanda's phone had photos of her with a bruise under her eye and a split lip, as well as videos of her husband threatening her, which she had recorded secretly. In a message to her sisters, Amanda said, "Seth just choked she until I almost lost consciousness. He split she lip." The prosecutor noted that a gun magazine was found next to her right hand, while a firearm with a loaded cartridge was located about 1.5 meters away against the wall and ceiling. Blood was also found on the bedspread, with 2 cartridges present, suggesting that the crime scene had been staged. This was in contrast to Seth's claim that he had not touched or moved the body or the gun. The sister of the Amanda testified in court that Amanda had told her just days before the tragedy that if anything happened to her, it would be at the hands of her husband. Police chief reported that when he received the call about Amanda's death, Seth initially mumbled something incoherent before suddenly screaming. Only after he calmed down was he able to explain what had happened. Additionally, Seth's cellmate testified during the trial, claiming that Seth confessed to him about killing his wife. He described how Seth had given Amanda alcohol, sedatives, and painkillers on the day she died, which caused her to lose consciousness, after which he shot her. A toxicology report confirmed that Amanda had high levels of alcohol and drugs in her system at the time of her death. On February 25, 2022, after 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Seth Perot, 45, guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Seth's lawyers were furious with the verdict, claiming that there was no direct evidence to prove his guilt. Following the verdict, Seth Perot's new legal team filed its first appeal, which was denied. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Yingying Zhang. Yingying Zhang was a student from China who came to the USA after being invited by the University of Illinois. She and her fiancé from China were planning a wedding. Sadly, she never got the chance to wear her wedding dress, as she was killed just 6 weeks after her arrival in the USA. Born on December 21, 1990, Yingying was a Chinese ecology student who graduated from Beijing University with a master's degree in environmental engineering. Yingying is a smart and cheerful person. In April 2017, 26-year-old Yingying traveled to Champaign, Illinois in the USA, invited by the University of Illinois to study for a year in the plant-growing department of natural resources. She intended to pursue graduate studies afterward. In China, Yingying met her fiancé, Alenka. They were classmates and top students, having dated for several years. The couple planned to marry once she returned home. On June 9, 2017, Yingying was leaving school to meet a real estate agent to sign a lease. At 1:39 p.m., she texted the agent to confirm that she would arrive around 2:10 p.m. This was the last text she sent, and she never arrived. At 2:40 p.m., the real estate agent texted her to ask where she was, but received no response. The agent eventually left to meet another client. As hours went by and Yingying did not return, her friends became increasingly worried. She was supposed to return to campus after signing the contract, as she had no other plans for the day. Her friends repeatedly called and messaged her, but she did not reply. Even Alenka could not contact her. This situation was very alarming. In the evening, Yingying still had not returned. Too worried, Yingying's friends contacted the police and reported her missing. At first, the police thought she might be somewhere with her friends. However, after questioning all of her friends and finding no new information, along with no activity recorded on her bank cards or phone, they began a search. Her phone was turned off at 2:28 p.m. on the day she went missing and was never turned back on. The police searched the university campus, but no one saw Yingying. A $10,000 reward was offered for information about Yingying's location. After discovering she was missing, her parents and Alenka traveled to Illinois and raised the reward to $50,000 for any information that could lead to her return. Both her parents and Alenka joined the search efforts and committed to staying until they found she. The FBI joined the investigation. They tracked her phone, which had been detected at a bus stop close to the campus. Yingying did not have a car and relied on public transportation, particularly buses. CCTV footage showed Yingying boarding a bus at 1:35 p.m. She was supposed to transfer to another bus at 1:52 p.m. but missed it. Cameras then captured her walking to the next bus stop. While she was waiting, a black four-door Saturn Astra drove by, circled back, and stopped near her at around 2:03 p.m. After a brief conversation with the driver, Enying got into the car and left. This was the last time she was seen on surveillance cameras. The driver was the last person known to have seen her, but the license plate number was not shown on the footage. The FBI needs to determine who was driving the car. They found 18 black four-door Saturn Astras registered in the area. One notable feature of the car, as seen in surveillance footage, was the cracked rims. After examining all 18 cars, they identified one that matched the description and also had the same sunroof. The car belonged to 28-year-old Brent Christensen. Brent grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and married his high school sweetheart Michelle Zortman in 2011. 2 years later, the couple moved to Champaign, Illinois, where he entered graduate school at the University of Illinois and worked as a teaching assistant. He left graduate school in 2016. Brent was considered a family man and had no criminal record. When FBI agents asked Brent about his whereabouts, he couldn't remember, mentioning he might have been sleeping at home or playing video games. His wife, Michelle, who he said he had an open relationship with, was away with another man. Brent allowed the agents to search his apartment and car. They discovered that a section of the car's interior, near the front passenger door, had been cleaned thoroughly while the rest of the car was still dirty. This was odd because cars are usually cleaned completely unless there is a specific reason for cleaning only part of it. A quick inspection of the apartment did not reveal any clues, so the agents took Brent to the police station for more questioning. At first, Brent denied knowing Enying or being involved in her situation. However, when shown surveillance footage, he admitted that he had been passing by and seen a girl who looked very upset. He said that he stopped to help her and she said she was late for a meeting, so he offered her a ride, which she accepted. He claimed that after suddenly taking a wrong turn a few blocks later, Enying became frightened and tried to open the locked front passenger door. He then stopped to let her out. After she escaped from the car, he never saw her again. When the police and Agent Igor asked him for a more detailed description of Enying, but he had difficulty distinguishing people of Asian descent. As a result, he became a suspect. There was only circumstantial evidence against him, not enough to make an arrest, so the police had to release Brent. However, they decided to follow him, monitor his activities, and gather more evidence of his possible involvement in Enying's disappearance. They realized that Brand was the person they needed to investigate. The FBI seized his phone, computer, camera, and other digital devices for analysis. They soon discovered that Brent was hiding important information. In March 2017, he visited a psychologist and revealed during his sessions that he was obsessed with thoughts of murder and fascinated by serial killers. He claimed that he had learned how to kill without leaving any evidence to avoid detection. Brent also confided in the psychologist that his life was falling apart. He had started drinking regularly and his wife Michelle, who was having an affair, had asked him for a divorce. Brent did not want to end the marriage. It was also revealed that Brent had met a woman named Gray Tora on a dating website. They began dating and met at his home. They agreed that Brent would take the dominant role in their relationship while Tora would be submissive. Brent even introduced Tora to his wife, who knew about their open relationship and that Tora was also seeing other men for intimate encounters. Police later discovered that his computer search history included terms like kidnapping, hygiene products, and how to track an iPhone. It appeared that he was searching for information on how to kidnap someone, disable phone tracking, clean up blood, and track a girl. However, this information was not enough to make an arrest. More evidence or a confession was needed from him. The FBI agent asked Tora, Brent's new girlfriend, to assist in the investigation, and she agreed to cooperate with the wiretap. On June 29, Brent attended a memorial event for the missing Enying girl, where her family desperately begged for her return. During the event, Brent drank, smiled, and even leaned in to sing softly to Dash. Afterwards, he used the Notes app on his phone to write, "It's me. She's number 13. She's gone forever," and he drew the number 13 on his hand. This made Tora shiver. Tora felt uncomfortable listening to Brent's story, but he continued, seemingly trying to impress her. Brent had no idea that she was cooperating with the FBI and recording everything he said. Meanwhile, a drunken Brent revealed the grisly details of Ying's final moments, smiling as he spoke. He took off Ying's clothes and began doing various things to her. She endured everything. He tried to strangle her for 10 minutes but then let her go. She was still breathing, and he was shocked to learn that she was still alive. She fought harder than anyone he had ever met. She was not the only person he had murdered. Now, there were 13 victims. Brent told Tora that he first committed this crime when he was 19 years old. He dragged a corpse into the bathroom of his apartment and hit her over the head with a baseball bat. He then stabbed her in the neck and decapitated her. In the recording, he compared himself to his idol, Ted Bundy, and bragged that he had more victims than Jeffrey Dahmer and John Gacy. He boasted that he had attracted national attention. These recordings became crucial evidence against him. Brent was arrested the next day. His apartment was thoroughly searched with luminol, revealing a bloody handprint on the wall next to Brent's bed and in the bathroom. There was also blood on the passenger door of his car. A large bloodstain was found on his mattress, and a cadaver dog detected the scent of human remains in the bathroom. DNA from Ying's toothbrush was found on a baseball bat, mattress, carpet, and in the bathroom. Brent's GPS data confirmed that he was present at the crime scene at the time of the incident. Additionally, receipts for trash bags and cleaning products were found in his home, along with a large gym bag, likely used to discreetly transport the remains. That morning at 7:45 a.m., he bought a large bottle of cheap rum from a liquor store. When he got home, he drank heavily, then drove around looking for victims while intoxicated. After a few hours, he spotted a student from the university, Emily Hogan, walking to a bus stop near the campus. He approached her and identified himself as an undercover police officer and asked her to get into his car for questioning. She refused and ran away. She later identified him and posted a warning on Facebook to warn others about the fake police in the area, which happened after the disappearance. After Emily rejected him, Brent sought out another victim and met a girl. He pretended to be a police officer and offered her a ride in his car. She believed him because he had a police badge, had a police radio, and drove a police car, so she got in. Once in the car, he drove home, confiscated her phone, and turned it off. Brent then tied her hands, took her to his apartment, raped and murdered her, and then dismembered her body. He bought cleaning supplies and attempted to clean both the house and the car, but investigators later discovered traces of blood hidden under the carpet and behind the baseboards. Brent claims the idea was spontaneous and unplanned. However, his computer search history suggests otherwise, suggesting he was prepared for it. Brent is charged with kidnapping, murder, and making false statements to a federal agent, and faces the death penalty. His trial began in June 2019. His lawyer argued that Brent had a difficult childhood, with his mother being an alcoholic and him not socializing with his siblings and lacking friends. During that time, he often contemplated ending his life and struggled with mental health issues, sleep problems, and substance abuse, which led him to seek help. His lawyer noted that Brent was not in a good mental state and was plagued by dark thoughts, especially after his wife mentioned divorce. This led to a downward spiral for him. At that moment, Brent was in the courtroom, wiping away tears. The attorney admitted Brent was guilty but asked the jury to give him a lenient sentence. During the trial, Brent's wife, Michelle, reported seeing a large gym bag and noted that Brent left with it on June 12. She said that there was no foul odor and that he easily threw the bag over his shoulder, leading her to believe that it could not have contained a body. It must have contained something light. However, she also acknowledged that the bag was large enough to hold a person and acknowledged that her husband could lift the weight of a girl. Michelle noticed new cleaning products in the house and stains on the carpet. Brent explained that he had a nosebleed, which caused the stains. So he purchased a cleaning product to try to clean the carpet. Despite the large stain, Michelle didn't find this suspicious. Calls from prison were recorded. During one call, Michelle told Brent that Tora had set him up. In court, Brent Christensen confessed to everything but didn't disclose the location of the bodies. On July 18, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Brent guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Later, Michelle relocated to another state and changed her last name to begin a new life. After the trial, Tora sought psychological help due to the traumatic experiences she had from hearing Brent's actions. A suicide note was discovered in Brent's cell, suggesting that he may have been planning to end his life or seek attention. He was then placed in solitary confinement and closely monitored. Although Brent claimed to have a 13th victim, no evidence of the existence of additional victims was ever found. He denied these allegations in court. The FBI analyzed 19 unsolved missing persons cases in Illinois and Wisconsin and submitted Brent's DNA for comparison, but no matches were found. It appears that Brent was just bragging to Tora and made up the story. Inying's family was not satisfied with the verdict. They felt that the killer deserved the death penalty. After learning that their daughter had been brutally murdered, all the parents wanted was to give Inying a proper burial. They were heartbroken to discover that their daughter's body would likely never be found. In their grief, they begged Brent to reveal the location of their daughter's remains. He told his lawyer that he had dismembered her body, put the pieces in 3 separate trash bags, and thrown them into a dumpster at his apartment complex. He also claimed that her phone, textbooks, and backpack were thrown into another dumpster, which was likely taken to a landfill. Police discovered that the trash at his apartment had been emptied 3 days after she went missing and the trash had been taken to a landfill. There, the trash had been compacted multiple times, mixed with other waste and scattered over a wide area, making it nearly impossible to find her remains. The only consolation for the family is that Brent will serve his sentence without parole, ensuring he cannot commit any more crimes.